In a moment here, I'm going to hand it over to my buddy Jonathan Kahn, who we've worked together in some syndication deals and also putting together a national conference that brought two presidential candidates that were in serious contention for a while, and mostly dealt with Bitcoin mining and energy. And when you think about these two sectors of Bitcoin mining and energy, you would think, how do they somehow converge? Well, we'll dive into a little bit of that today. And if anyone is interested and wants to stick around for more sessions, we're going to be ongoing until 5 o'clock, really 4:45 today. So we have 3 sections that are coming up. You're the first section, and then another one, and another one. And at 5 o'clock, just about 4:45, 5, we're going to walk over to the rooftop bar at the TCU Hotel if anyone wants to hang out and meet some of these great folks. There's a lot of money on the table, so to speak. And more importantly, if this is like your one chance to kind of let loose and socialize and in a kind of that collegial way, you're more than welcome to. And I love to meet y'all and chat with y'all informally too. I know we always just work on school, so it's just another chance to drop by and chat. So we're almost all set up here. We have 2 live feeds. We have a Zoom feed that is recording the session per usual. That will be dropped on your Discord server, like always. And then also we have Twitter Spaces. And with Twitter Spaces, we have a live stream of engagement with folks who are in the energy and Bitcoin mining space. Some of them are probably in that kind of old Bitcoin culture. So there's a little bit of, it kind of gets a little muddy sometimes. But we're focusing on business, and we're going to talk about energy and carbon credits and just a massive economy. We talk about economies of scale and total addressable markets and how we want to play in a big space. And this is in the spirit of that. At the end, really at any point, we'd like to encourage you to ask Discord questions, but at some point I'll prompt you formally. I'd like, as usual, to have at least 1 question per team that will qualify everybody's kind of participation for the grade, which couples with your attendance grade. We do that and we'll be all set. As a courtesy to our speakers, though, when you're not giving that question or engage directly in Discord or looking something up, please do lower your laptops and kind of set the phones aside and try to learn something a bit today, or take away something from today. Oh, nice. It's coming in clearly. Nice. And the reason why I kind of earnestly ask this is because you have now really 2 lectures left. This is it. This is this one, and then we'll have one formal goodbye lecture. And in that, with our industry folks, we're talking about emerging economies of scale, something that's been through mostly regulatory capture. There's been a new kind of created design of how to capture value. And there are real opportunities that begin now, and that's part of today's onus. The other piece of this is the tuition ROI element that I talk about, which is get the most return out of your investment at the university. And as for marketing management, if you can glean any insights about syndication and creative banking and how to build strategic relationships to capitalize some of the energy projects that are coming up, also recognizing that DFW is a major administrative hub for wildcatters and energy deals, you might realize that even if you're not interested in energy per se, but love marketing or supply chain or some other aspect of your education, that has a tie-in to a parent industry or bedrock industry of your area. Look, we have defense, we have energy, and we have an emerging data science community, and we have a strong warehousing base here in Fort Worth. Am I missing an industry sector? That's about it. And we're growing. We have some other pockets that are popping up. But if you want to stay in this area in particular, this is one of these kind of tenets of the region to dive into. And of course, you can go into the 22 HQs for Fortune 500 that are in the area. We've got American Airlines and Schwab and things like that. But I mean, in the kind of high mid market and then the down market opportunities that often pay really well if they're looking for specialized talent, which you will build in a year or two. These are one of those conversations to kind of give you a little bit of headwind and figure out how to break in. All right, with that, I'd like to introduce my buddy Jonathan. Jonathan, if you can give a little background on yourself, and then from there, we'll introduce our panelists to come on up.
Hey guys, thanks for having us. Is that better? All right. So my name is Jonathan Cohn. I own BitPetro. It's a small consultancy that does site acquisition for Bitcoin miners. It also does site acquisition and development for energy companies. The reason I want to come here and talk to you guys today is because I want you to be aware of all of the opportunities that are coming up in the what I like to kind of reference as the new carbon capitalism or new energy economy. We're having to create solutions around energy where we're solving for our carbon footprint by being profitable rather than by holding out our hand and waiting for Uncle Sam to fix it. And so a month or two ago, I went to PA to speak at an orphan and plugging well conference. And you might say, what in the heck does that have to do with marketing or Bitcoin? And actually, what I would say is a lot. You know, these are industries that are dealing with their legacy footprints and their future markets, and they're doing it in different ways. And so what I want to present to you guys is 3 sections of the industry that I found at that conference and how they interplay and how they maybe come to solutions that not only make it feasible to deal with our carbon footprint, but lucrative. So in light of that, I'd like to introduce some of the guests that are here with us. From, all right, 06, we have Andre. And if he can come up here real quick and give himself a little intro. But Andre and I were introduced in Pittsburgh at the conference. He gave an amazing talk on carbon credits and the carbon registries, which they are a part of. So I'd like to give him a little chance to introduce himself. No, just introduce yourself.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Nice to
Go right into that.
Oh, into the mic. Okay.
It goes into
Oh, fair enough.
There you go.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to come over here and talk to you guys about, well, 06 and kind of the carbon markets in general. My background is, so I went to UT, which I don't know how competitive that is, you know, in terms of TCU, but kind of oil and gas background, reservoir engineering. But it's really kind of taken me a meandering way to kind of end up working with some ex-colleagues to really develop 06. And their idea behind that was there's so much optimization to be done like in the oil and gas space. And that's kind of what really drove us to kind of think through and develop the 06 concept, which is there's so many operators, so many wells in the industry, which we rely on to provide cheap, reliable energy. So it's definitely essential. But I don't know, it was like one of the statistics that kind of blew my mind, which was that 90% of the production and energy that we produce comes from 10% of the infrastructure. And so if we can get rid of a bunch of that, then awesome. And develop like the carbon markets, where they are and where they're developing to, really seem to lend themselves as kind of a market-based incentive structure to utilize. And then in combination with the blockchain, and I think that's part of the reason why we're talking over here, really kind of added a missing element to the carbon markets, which is really trust and transparency. So even though the blockchain is not really my specialty, I'm more on the technical engineering side. There's so many synergies, and yeah, so that's kind of what we're about, and that's what we're developing. So I look forward to talking more to you guys about it.
Excellent. Thanks. All right.
Here?
You can, yeah, go ahead and grab a seat. So next is Jim Rowe from Captorian. So if you can come up here and give an intro. Thank you.
You're welcome. Should I correct you about pronunciation?
Sure, please.
Last name is Rao, R-O-W, like rowdy. That's it. But it's all good. No one's going to lose a birthday over it. I'm from Houston. I own a couple companies. I believe it's 32, but I have an investment banking group called Auditorium. We launched a few years ago to be the first online digital investment bank. We did one of the first STOs in the United States. We did the first NFT as a security in the world. And under that entity, we also did the first crypto exchange in El Salvador. So very interesting. If anybody wants to learn how to develop a crypto exchange, I'm happy to tell you how to do it and sell it. We also have a RIA transfer agent. I run a crypto staking company. I've owned a blockchain mining company. So I've done quite a few things in that category under the Entoro label, also insurance companies, et cetera. So I don't want to bore you. By the way, I'm also looking for 8 to 10 new analysts. So if anybody has a interest in a full-time job, let me know. The other thing we do, we launched a company called Captorium to be the first engineered solutions and regulated carbon credit market in the world. We have launched that. We focus on engineered solutions, not nature-based solutions. We also launched the first carbon credit asset management company called Green Shield Offsets, and a number of other businesses. And I'll go through all of those a little bit later. So happy to answer any questions. And I went to the University of Wyoming, Arizona State MBA. Background is very simple. Worked for the World Bank for a few years, Latin American project finance, worked for a little company called Enron. Anybody know who that is? Okay. I was the VP of business structuring for Enron. Then I became the CEO of a public oil and gas company, and then started a bunch of other companies along the way. Happy to tell you what the pros and cons of being an entrepreneur are, since I've been doing it for 24 years.
Thank you, sir. All right. Okay, and next is John Lytle from Konica Minolta. John again and I met again at the conference, but Konica Minolta and I have also worked on actually deploying their technology on the field, testing orphan wells in South Texas and here in the Barnett Shale. And their camera is pretty special because, as he will tell you, it's not about just seeing the leak. You have to quantify it. And so that helps companies like 06 and Conturient actually develop a provable methodology that there was a leak. There is no longer a leak. And that's when you're talking about the kinds of credits we'll get into, he'll dive into that.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everybody for turning out. Andre and I talked a little bit earlier, and we think we're going to make it compulsory for attendance for all of our presentations. We'll do the little selfie thing, and that'll be a great way to get people to show up. But I'm John Lytle with Konica Minolta. I'm the program development manager for our optical gas imaging and quantification camera. I don't know a lot about blockchain or carbon credits. It's one of the reasons that I'm here, to learn more about the process and the system. What I do know about is how to find methane leaks and how to measure them. And the importance of that, with how it relates to what we're talking about today, is verification and accountability. So finding the leaks, finding the reduction in the amount of methane that's going into the air, reducing the footprint, provides accounting that's valuable for the carbon credits. In other words, you can't have credit unless you can prove that you've reduced the emissions. And so we have a tool and technology and a system in place to allow that to happen. There are several others. This is not the only game in town, but it's economical, it's efficient, and it gets more and more accurate. So we continue to improve, and really happy to be a part of your afternoon here and part of the discussion.
Thank you so much. All right. So we will have other guests joining us. I don't know if they're going to be able to join us for this particular talk. We have Lee Bratcher from the Texas Blockchain Council will be here hopefully at 1. And then I have one other petroleum engineer that was going to join us. We'll see if he can make it. The reason for, us coming here to a marketing class is because this is how I get to speak to a bunch of young minds about Bitcoin. But as part of that, Chico asked me to really relate this to you guys as marketing students, and to understand maybe a glimpse of the real world of how marketing works for different industries, even though we're kind of all talking about carbon credits. Each one of these energy technologies, Bitcoin mining, optical gas imaging, has gone through an adoption curve, right? At some point, a Bitcoin was worth 0, then it became worth 2 pizzas, and now we have $70,000 Bitcoin. Similarly, the optical gas imaging camera started out as a thermal imaging device that was called a bolorimeter. And if you go to an oil and gas operator and say bolorimeter, their eyes gloss over and they stop listening to you. So they had to figure out how to pitch this technology and to make it accessible to the people on the field That's a challenge for all of us. All of us here have to listen to our clients and adapt what we're saying in order to get a closing lead, right? Otherwise, we're not making money. So I want you to kind of have that in the back of your minds when we're going through this. The questions from, I'm going to try and moderate and let them kind of give you their perspectives. But I'm just curious. How many of you guys would like to be in oil and gas or energy? Okay, few. How many of you would like to be in carbon credits? How many of you knew that carbon credits was a job you could get? Okay, about as many hands as the first group. And what about Bitcoin? How many of you would want a job in Bitcoin? 1, 2, okay, all right. So most everybody here wants a job pitching and marketing and selling stuff and kind of learning about deploying your abilities to market other companies. So we'll try to kind of craft that to you. So I'll start by asking, as a company that needs to figure out where you start from zero, where do you go, Andre? How did you guys start from zero? How did you get the message out that you were who you were and what you do and targeting your clients? Because that's a difficult spot to be in when you're in a brand new industry.
No, definitely. And I think this was like my really first startup, like from the very beginning. And honestly, after lessons learned, if we were going to do anything differently, because we kind of had the idea with the product and what that the demand was there, was definitely filling a niche. And we kind of went through a full development cycle and build a prototype and kind of establish some projects before we really went to the market looking for buyers. I think what we learned from that was really establishing demand first, and potentially even working with some of your first buyers to know that there's going to be somebody on that receiving end. Because that's been a bit of a challenge over the last couple of months, but I mean, we're getting there, but nothing in the startup world works according to the timeline that you would like, that you would envision. So I think that's kind of the first thing, but really it's learning who your buyers are and how to speak their language, which kind of being a reservoir engineer in the petroleum business, and then kind of transitioning and utilizing the carbon market. So ultimately, we've got kind of two customers, if you will. We've got the suppliers, who are the oil and gas operators. They're going to be retiring their operations and cleaning it up in exchange for the generation of the carbon credits. But then it's about marketing those carbon credits to the buyers. And these are generally companies not in the oil and gas industry. So you have to learn how to speak to financial institutions, to the Amazons, the UPS, the Deltas, the companies that are not in your business and that might not have the same vocabulary, and understanding what their pain points are, like what is it that they're looking for from your product. So in the realm of carbon credits, it's really kind of a high quality credit, which means that it's actually doing what you say it is, what it is that they're paying for, that you're actually abating, preventing the emission of CO2 into the atmosphere in a credible way and delivering that message in a transparent way. But being an engineer, I mean, that's something that I definitely kind of struggled with. I get kind of caught up, in the engineering technicalities of things. And then, like you were saying, people's eyes kind of gloss over a little bit, like very quickly. So you really got to figure out what language resonates with your market and how to get that across very quickly and get their emotions involved. And I would say in the voluntary carbon market, real quick, there's kind of fear and uncertainty. There was some turbulence in the last year, and there's a lot of sustainability chief officers that lost their jobs. So right now, it's if you can establish credibility and minimize their risk for their self-interest as well as for the reputation of their company. So,
well, I'm sure that our audience here doesn't know anything about glossing over. But aside from that, Jim, can you tell us, you've obviously had a lot of experience in different parts of the energy stack. What made you decide there is enough of a market need for you to start up Capturian and to develop that idea into something?
Well, I looked at being a former operator and obviously operating Bitcoin mining companies, and actually we're a staking company as well. So we actually are the largest operator, one of the protocols out there, or node operators. But for me, I sat there and I looked at it and said, this is the most screwed up industry I've ever seen in my life. And I said to myself, you know, I'm just a country boy. I can figure this out. There's got to be a better way to do this. And step back and just think about all the things that have been done before and look at it. What does the analogy look like? And to me, the carbon credit, and I'll go, I actually want to ask a question first. Does anybody really know what a carbon credit is? I'll explain it if you want. Do you understand? Does anybody know what methodologies are?
I think that's a great intro. What do you guys do as a registry? Because I think a registry is going to
I
define
had
a
to
lot.
grill Jonathan on this for
Sure.
weeks. It's like, say it again, explain it again.
Yeah,
It's-
it's
it's-
say, tell me.
It's not that complicated. So if I may, a carbon credit is, as Andre was kind of starting to allude to, is that you get a credit or offset calculation based on something you are doing, and it has to have an additionality to you have to taking something out of the system. So be it a solar company or well bore abatement or whatever it happens to be, you're going to get a certain number of credits based on a methodology. And those historically, those methodologies become an academic process. It's like almost like GAAP. Okay, so there's some formula there and rules that you get a credit based on. So if you're a project company, you're out there, you're assessing what the economic viability of that project is, but you also, if it's in the environmental space, you may get credits for doing certain things like taking carbon out of the atmosphere. That being said, there's 1,200 current methodologies right now. My guess it'll be up to 3,000 methodologies in the next couple of years. And they're basically the rules to create this. So what you have is basically a project company is trying to figure out what do they may have. And that's usually where the concept of validation starts. Okay. You try to validate what it is that you're trying to do. So if you're a company and you're producing, you're doing wellbore abatement, meaning you're plugging and abandoning wellbores that are leaking methane. And you say, oh, this is going to have this kind of calculation, whatever, that's what you do. Then you need to go from validation to verification. Verification is a third party. It's an independent engineering firm, typically somebody that has a specialty. And it's the reason you have third party is so you can't play with the numbers, right? So those of you that know what oil and gas is, you know that there's a reservoir engineering companies that do verification of oil and gas wells and the production potential of that. Then you have, once you've gone through that process to say, oh, we've got somebody to do the third party activity, then you go into something called authentication. Authentication is basically the due diligence of that project and those methodologies to create and calculate what the total number of potential carbon credits are. Then you go through and then basically that goes onto the registry. The registry basically books it. We use blockchain for ours. We use Adara as our protocol for that. And then you actually sell it on the exchange. So you go validation, verification, authentication, registry, and the exchange. At the end of all of that, once those credits have basically been expired or retired, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get to a point of retirement. Any questions on that? I know that might have been a little.
I actually have a question. So,
Okay.
so when you're trying to define a credit, once it's generated, is it considered a security that can enter a secondary market?
Great question. It is not in the current state right now. There's really three types of classifications you can all have. You can have an asset, you can have a commodity, or you can have a security. Current law, current activities, carbon credit in its current form is not a security. In fact, it is an asset or it can be classified as a commodity. That gets you to the point of who may be the regulator in the United States. My guess is, and I've been promoting this and I've asked the commissioner many times of the CFTC, they need to be the regulator for carbon credits. And I think it would be, if you knew me, you'd say I'm the last guy to ever want regulation. But in this case, it's such a circus out there. A little regulatory guidance wouldn't be all that bad. And in fact, I think it would make the market better, more transparent. But in that situation, it is not a security. We have the capability of making it a security. You could actually create a pool and sell it for some kind of value. For those of you that have been following a lot of the blockchain securities issues as far as fines and what the SEC has done to some crypto companies, et cetera, it's frankly disgusting, but we'll move past that, is that they were blamed for selling a security where you could argue that it was not a security. For those of you that are interested, and you need to understand what the Howey rule is, it was a case back in the 1950s that determined what is a security, defines a security. So in the current situation, if you're just doing what Andre is doing, creating a credit, it is not a security. If you put it into a pool and you're selling it for value accretion based on the value of efforts of another person, that can be deemed a security. So sorry for the long-winded.
No, that's great. And so when you are booking a credit, what you're essentially doing is you're saying there was either a carbon emission or there is a carbon abatement, and now we've proven it and we've created some kind of certificate, and I'm selling you that certificate.
You can't have a certificate technically. Most people are, this is all digital anymore. I mean, it's pretty much all blockchain. In fact, it's been one of the greatest use cases for blockchain. Okay, because you have the immutable database concept of it. You can do the tracking, the retirement, et cetera. I mean, 3, 4, 5 years ago, you had clowns selling this stuff out of the back end of an Impala, right? And you had no ability to track and verify and audit, et cetera, which if you're Delta Airlines or Apple and you're out buying credits, and some of these shysters were selling these things 2 and 3, 4, 5, 10 times.
So what he's talking about is there's credits out there that you can create a carbon credit by planting a tree or saying that you're not going to cut down a forest. But you're basically saying that you're going to do that into the future 30 years or something like that. So it's a lot easier to prove that you have emissions that you stopped than it is to prove that you planted a tree and that tree will be there 30 years from now. I think what
Well,
you were
you
talking.
actually just made the argument for his business model, and that is the difference between, if I may, because I think this is an incredibly important thing. There's nature-based credits and there's non-nature-based credits, which are really called engineered solutions. And if you think about it, for those of you that have an interest in this, you need to read the 3 Guardian articles in 2023 that basically accuse the entire nature-based market and Vera in particular of fraudulent activities. So it's actually pretty good. It really explains everything you need to know on this space. If you really read those and you understand them, it's quite powerful. But the difference between what Andre is creating is really an engineered solution. You can measure it. You know exactly what it is. Nature-based is a hope and a prayer that if you're going to plant trees in 20 years, that it's actually going to be done. And there's been so much fraud because what happens is you pay Chief Ooga Booga Ooga not to cut down the trees. And then, 3 or 4 years later, he says, thank you very much. Appreciate all the Western money, and goes and whacks down all the trees and sells them anyway. Okay. So what do? You have no recourse against that chief.
Absolutely. And it's also hard to prove that it's not the same 10 trees from different angles. So,
and measuring the growth of trees and all the atmospheric issues is a lot more difficult than what Andre can do when he's actually plugging a well. You can actually calculate the benchmark, the before, after, and actually do that. Now, I think that the methodologies, I think, are flawed because they want you to measure every goddamn well, but I wouldn't do that. I mean,
well, also let's talk about measuring, because I think that's what John's company is really focused on, is detection and measuring. And I've seen it firsthand. And it's really actually very impressive that they can do what they can do. They can basically take a camera and see what is invisible to our eyes. It does that by detecting not necessarily the atom itself, but the cooling effect of the atom in the atmosphere. So really kind of black magic that goes on inside of one of these cameras to let you see the gas. But more importantly, as far as the methodologies that the gentlemen are talking about, you have to be able to put a number on that detection. You can't just say there is some leak. You have to say there is this much leak. And so, John, I'd love for you to talk to us about how Konica developed something that usually, it was industry knowledge that what the camera you guys sell could not do what you're doing.
Yeah, the technology for the actual imaging, which is kind of black magic, but it's really physics. I'm not a physicist, so I'm not going to get into the details. But basically, hydrocarbons absorb a certain wavelength of light, a light energy. So when the light or energy is reflected off of some kind of a background, if there is a hydrocarbon cloud between the camera and that background, it's going to show up looking like smoke. Because that energy has been absorbed where the rest of the energy comes through to the camera, and you can see the image in the background. So that's that technology has been around for about 20 years or so and been used practically in the field to find leaks, to find hydrocarbon methane in particular emissions from various processes, including wells. What we developed was the capability of the camera to not only image, which is very compelling evidence, by the way. When you have a camera and you see stuff coming out of a piece of equipment or out of the ground, you're like, holy shit, something really needs to be done about this. So it's compelling as far as getting action to be taken. Now, the challenge came, how do we measure this stuff? Is there a way to show how much is in this cloud? A way to tell how much is in this. A little closer?
Yeah, here, over the pipeline. Probably.
Yeah.
You, but our gentleman next to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Is
this better?
Hold it over the white line on top of it.
Yeah.
You're blocking the antenna.
You look, you can have liquidation events, but holding the mic sometimes can be the, yeah.
Yeah, it's
The
exactly right.
complication of all
All kinds of comments, but we'll just keep.
No, no,
Yeah,
I'm an
clearly,
easy target. I'm an egghead here. Yeah.
clearly I'm a video guy and not an audio guy. So anyway, we developed this technology that allows the camera to not only see, but to measure. And in our discussion here, that's important because the measurement it quantifies the emission. And after the emission is abated in some manner, whether there's a repair or if it's consumed by a generator or it's somehow taken out of the equation, as Jim was talking about, we want to measure it again. We want to measure the residual or what's left, what's there in that same space. And that difference will contribute to the carbon credits. Secondly, this measurement is important and the accuracy is important in a general sense. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But it's got to be verifiable. It's got to be repeatable. You've got to be able to demonstrate that the gas could be seen, can be measured, and that this is a replicable situation or procedure, so that the credit is substantiated, it's verified, and it's accounted for. And this is the value that we bring in with the technology. So we nerd out on great pictures like this and being able to not only see where it's coming from, but then measure again, how much. Something we send a technician to button that up, it goes away, and now we can tell how much carbon we have reduced from going into the atmosphere based on any scale, on time, straight volume, whatever. So that's what it looks like out in the field, and this is how we contribute to this space here. This is what I know about, and I'm learning a lot from these guys.
The adage of a picture where it didn't happen holds true in the carbon space.
Totally. Again, that compelling nature of an image.
So now the current methodologies ask for what are called chamber detection devices. So basically what that means is the gas has to go into some sort of device, and usually it enters into like a little tube, and there's either some catalyzer or an optical image sensor, and it reads the parts per million and lets you see this. What's difficult about that is that you have to be basically literally on top of the leak, and a lot of times you have to use high flow, which means you're taking kind of like a leaf blower in reverse, and you're sticking it up to the well, and you're going and it tells you how much the leak is. Obviously, if there's dangerous gases in the area, this is not really optimal. And so the ability to image from a distance is very important. But I think one of the things that's also interesting is this idea that into the future, right? We have to continue to prove this into the future, and that from a cost effectiveness standpoint, going out and deploying a camera is very cheap in comparison to deploying something that you have to calibrate every single time and get baselines and all of that. I'd love to hear from both of you guys. Have you considered OGI in your methodologies? Is that something that you're looking at? Can you contrast the difference between the existing, methodologies versus using newer technologies?
That actually his question, because I actually don't create methodologies.
We did create a methodology for now. So I can speak to that. But one thing I wanted to kind of add before kind of like to the voluntary carbon market, I don't know what the background is, but considering that there's like a marketing class, right? I think in terms of the credibility, I mean, I'm assuming like reputation and brand, right? It's kind of a big part of the marketing, if you're a company or you're an entity. And that's kind of what everything that we've been talking about with respect to all the stuff that goes into the generation of the carbon credits, but really how they're used, who the end buyers are, right? So I don't know how much you guys know about kind of the net zero or kind of like, if your company claims, hey, we're going to reduce our net emissions by 2030 by 40%. Carbon credits play a big part of that, or they're trying to stipulate that they do. And so if a company is marketing it themselves or a project like, hey, we're very environmentally conscious, we're very sustainably oriented, we're pledging that we're going to reduce our company-wide emissions by a certain amount, and then they use carbon offsets as a part of that to meet that goal. That means that we were not able to do that in our own operations, but instead of kind of taking, some number of tons of CO2 emissions from their own operations, they paid somebody else for the reductions or abatement that they created. And that's fundamentally what the carbon credits are. So it's all going into the atmosphere. And so it really doesn't matter where it comes from, and the net effect is the same, hence the expression net zero. Now, where this comes into play and where it was like with the Vera and kind of the Guardian articles that were mentioned, is there was companies out there, you had, Porsche, you had Nestle, you had, really top tier companies claiming these emission reductions. And then when it comes out that those were fraudulent or lies or not as credible, then not only does it kind of impact the institution that issued them, but those generally aren't known. The brands that are really ultimately heard are these extremely valuable brands where really, I mean, the brand is the value of the company. Sure, I mean, you can make a good claim that whatever product you produce, I mean, if you're buying a Porsche, you're really buying the brand. The Porsche would not be able to charge half the price that they do if it was, a Trabant from, Eastern Europe, no matter how good the car was. And so if your reputation gets damaged, that is billions of dollars worth of cost. And so that's really the kind of the space that the carbon markets occupy. And as that sustainability becomes a more important part of each company's reputation, having credible claims around that, and if you're purchasing these, then there's a lot riding on that. And so that's where everything that we're trying to do comes into play. And that kind of comes down to the technology that we use for the measurements and the credibility and the documentation you can create around that to not only be able to convince the verifiers and the auditors that it's accurate. Part of it is, how do you tell the narrative in a way that to the general public who might be wanting to audit, that the claims of the brand that they're investing in, that they're buying, are legitimate. So, I mean, and that's kind of something that we really struggle with as well, because I mean, especially in the engineered solutions, in a way, it's easy to kind of sell a deforestation presentation project, these nature-based credits. They sell very easily. Every company wants to have, just look at all these trees that we planted, or look at all these trees that we prevented from being cut down. I promise they totally would have been cut down unless we paid these guys, which that's kind of a weird incentive structure anyway. It's like, I don't know how many of y'all watch, was the Last Week Tonight with John Oliver? And he kind of ended it on that skid with the axe. It's like, pay up or the tree gets it. Which, I don't know where that comes from, but it is not exactly a good feeling. So it's really, how do you tell the story, and having pictures like with the OGI cameras and focusing on that, and then also kind of the co-benefits that come with these engineered solutions that tell the positive stories. So the technical data is absolutely essential for a certain part of that verification process. Having that consistent narrative is great, but having an impactful story that sells to your general market is, I would say, as important, or perhaps even more, because so that's where the OGI and we do aspire to utilize it. It is still fledgling technology. And a part of the issue is because there's millions of wells out there. There's, hundreds of thousands of miles of pipeline that this technology can be applied on. And how does that scale on a consistent basis, right? Which I think is that we're trying to apply. And so I will be honest, in our methodology that we first put out, we did not use actual measurement. Like, most of our value comes from actually the oil and gas that is not produced. And we kind of made an assumption, a conservative assumption about the amount of fugitive emissions that are out there. That's based on studies from the Environmental Defense Fund over the last 8 years. So we feel that's defensible. And ultimately, we do want to give credit to that because ultimately it's more value to the operators that implement that. Because right now we're being way too conservative, which is, I mean, it's good for our methodology and it's good for the people that use these offsets, is that like, hey, you're doing more good than you're actually paying for. That is a guarantee.
So let's talk about those people. Those people are your operators, right? And like probably everybody in this room has some knowledge of somebody that has worked in the oil field, right? I would imagine that being in Texas, you guys have at least one relative that's worked in the oil field. But we, in the oil field, you have very different types of companies. You have your mom and pop operator, you have your midstream or mid-sized guy. Midstream is another part of the equation, but a mid-sized company, and then you have your majors, right? But when you're talking about marketing OGI and marketing carbon credits, essentially what you're telling that operator as a customer is, look, it's expensive for you to go deal with this environmental hazard that you have in your hands. Let us help you by quantifying how much you are going to improve the environment around it is, and that's going to offset your cost of dealing with that problem. Is that pretty accurate? Is that how you would frame it, Jim?
Yeah, that's exactly. In fact, I have a company called Toro Eco Advisors that does exactly what you just described. So basically the consulting for that. Can I jump onto something here? Because Andre brought it up, I think it's pretty good, this is a marketing class, correct? I mean, well, if I'm you, I'd test these guys on what greenwashing is, right? That's a very, it's the flip side of doing good. It's actually the head fake of not doing good. Please, regale us.
All right, so this is what the deep corduroy elbow patch version would be. So in products, you'll sometimes see the branding or positioning of great for the environment in whatever sticker, whatever certification. Sometimes it can even be something like GMO free, which many people somehow conflate with the with climate or environment standards, when really it's just a branding mechanism. Greenwashing is the empty calories or the kind of it's pseudo fraudulent, but it's essentially representing the green kind of environmentalist effort in message without substantiating or having real evidence as to whether or not it has an environmental impact in the positive category.
Was it like the natural versus organic?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think it's worse than that. If I can expand on your point, is that those individuals that have been engaging in greenwashing, also those that have committed to reducing their carbon footprint, are now looking to be sued by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So those of you that are out there looking at jobs, I don't know, what level is this? Sophomore, junior, senior? I can't tell you. You guys all you guys are younger than my own kids, so I don't know.
Mostly sophomore.
Sophomores, okay. So you're maybe not quite ready for a job yet, but if you think about it, you have to look at it and ask yourself, is my company about ready to get sued? And we're talking massive amounts because you have a gentleman that's the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission right now, Gary Gensler, who loves to sue companies. And he loves to sue companies that, in his mind, have created fraud. Now, if you're a company and let's say, I'm going to use an example, you're Apple, and you said, we're going to reduce our footprint and the carbon, we're going to do it by 100,000 metric tons a year, whatever and you don't fulfill on that, he actually considers that a commitment because you did that as a public company. Shareholders bought or sold securities based on that information, thinking that you're either a good player or not, and you're going to get sued for it. So there's a huge risk management issue right now for C-suite players out there that are exposing their companies to total, potential decimation by overcommitting to some of these aspects. That's why over the last 18 to 24 months, you've seen companies globally pull back and say, we're not doing it. In fact, I talked to a client yesterday who's one of the biggest oil and gas operators in Australia. They just got sued by the Australian Securities Commission for the same thing. So it's a real issue. Now, there's going to be mitigation issues that go along with that. We're actually looking to create a giant pool and then insure against that pool, which will actually hedge against litigation risk. So every problem comes with a solution. And what it usually does, it just becomes a tax on companies and a tax on everyone sitting in this room.
It's helpful.
Well, how much time do we have left?
Yeah.
Well, we can turn to Discord now for a little bit of like tone
Q&A, yeah.
students.
Can I
yeah,
add
yeah.
one more thing, like to John's technology, right? Where we're kind of talking about the future of methane emissions.
Sure.
So there's a thing called responsibly sourced gas, which is kind of a fledgling thing, but effectively what it means is the production of natural gas with no fugitive methane emissions, which is where the OGI camera comes into play. And I think right now the way we're framing it is kind of some added value to the operator that you can claim if you can prove that you have no fugitive methane emissions. But so we've been kind of talking in this space for a number of months, and it is a general consensus kind of in the industry that shortly, imminently, whether it be through kind of customer demand or regulation, the responsibly sourced gas, which means no fugitive emissions along your entire kind of supply stream, is not going to be there's not going to be a premium on the price that you receive. That is going to be the standard across the industry. And you already see major international players, namely Japan, kind of requiring that and kind of putting forward those requirements. So it's not that you're going to receive a premium. It's that you're either going to receive a significant penalty in the forms of either, EPA fines for your emissions or from your clients, or you might just not even be able to market your gas. So, I mean, I think I'm a little bit jealous because you're going to be very ahead of this curve.
Yeah, and this is, it's an important point. Responsibly sourced gas, it's good. It's kind of a buzzword. It runs into the danger of the greenwashing, but there is accountability behind it. And I think just getting back to the marketing thing, compelling marketing is being accountable and being verifiable. So when you're taking data and putting it out there into the market, you want to be able to back it up. And this is what Europe and Japan are requiring now for natural gas exports. So really great part of my job is I get to deal with all the regulatory bullshit in the US with the EPA that's required. So this stuff is mandatory. Producers have to follow these guidelines. Working outside of that, working with companies that are doing methane reduction and quantification and accounting on a voluntary basis is super fun. Like it gives me the best night's sleep of my life. So I really enjoy being in that space, and we're happy to help with that. But again, comes down to qualification and verification, repeatability and accountability.
All right, this is it's a new language for many of us, and I mean Jonathan's been getting me into this for several. I guess we're on year 2 or 3 at this point, and so I understand if many of y'all need to maybe dive into the career piece of this, like how do we bundle companies, or how do we syndicate and build an LP list with enough viable capital to make quick plays. It's okay to go into something that's within your peripheral knowledge, or feel free to step beyond that. So at this time, each team posit at least one question. We'll go into our Discord thread, and believe it or not, getting into that for us was hard. I was spending a lot of time figuring out how to do that. Minimize
Did you
here.
get it?
Yeah, I got it. I just need to pull up your main tabs. That's weird.
It's because we're
Oh, there we go. So here you'll see one of our Discords. There you go. Cool. Let's click on that top. Folks, 045. There we go. All right, y'all. Please do posit questions. And one of the questions I have is more of a softball, is how do you capitalize if it's a technology use case that you need to pilot and figure out what to do, or if it's in your growth strategy, James, which is to me, personally really fascinating, how you've become such a big proprietor, and how you've decided to go into these kind of immutable stamps with NFT markers, and then other assets that you can build on. That's for anyone in energy, that to me is always seems like kind of a clunky step, but you seem to have done it successfully.
The concept of raising money.
Raising money and then also communicating to legacy communities what's happening in this new layer tech.
Raising money is the most painful disgusting process you'll ever do in your life.
Welcome to marketing. Yeah.
There is absolutely no fun involved. You will spend many sleepless nights. So for me, I was fortunate enough to be able to bootstrap a lot of my activities. I'm lucky. I'm probably the exception to the rule in that I was able to have some successes early on to build and keep building. I only have 2 investors, friends of mine. I have no institutional investors. That being said, on Monday, that will change because we have a project that we've got on the market that everybody in this room will hear about it in another 6 or 8 months, but that is way beyond my checkbook. But expect to fail miserably many, many, many times. I bet I've failed more times than there are students in this room. And you just got to pick yourself up and go back at it. Now, when you're talking about actually building a project for funding, obviously there's plenty of resources now to do that. In fact, one of the reasons why I got into the, when I started Auditorium was to create the first online digital investment bank. In fact, we're one of only 8 broker-dealers in the United States that's authorized to do Reg A. We are also about ready to launch a self-directed Reg CF program. Anybody know what Reg CF is? Crowdfunding. Okay, so you're able to raise up to $5 million right now without offering documents. So you can do that. They're talking about that number going to 25. It started off being $1 million, which was a joke. And then it's looking to go to 25 million and Reg A to go to 150 million. But if you're looking to raise money, you obviously need to have a plan. You need to do your modeling. You need to do one of the big things you got to do is always have a term sheet, what you think is going to happen. The resources are out there now. 20 years ago, they really weren't. And then you obviously need to have FAQs and a lot of other things. But then a lot of times the first money you raise is really friends and family. So your rich uncle or your mom or your dad or whomever, those are the only people that are going to bet on you early on. And most likely you're going to lose their money.
Yeah, I've done that.
You're going to lose their money, but you just don't want to lose a lot of it. Okay. But to going in and doing institutional money, et cetera, institutional money is basically venture capital, private equity. By the way, those are very tough markets to want to go because you will literally give up, I call it indentured service. So you don't own your company after you have a VC or a private equity investor, even though you may still maintain majority ownership. You do not.
And you're on their timeline.
You're on their timeline. I could give you some horror stories, but that's not this audience.
All right, this is exciting. Yes.
Which I kind of agree with that. And as somebody who's kind of been in the startup, oil and gas space, which over the last decade and a half, there's been a lot of private equity money floating around in that. But honestly, over the last 5-6 years, well, maybe even 7 years, like that's just disappeared and dried up because it's really hard to kind of get the returns that these guys expect. And there's the whole indentured servitude thing to kind of like tackle. But it's been really interesting because, I mean, obviously there's, especially being kind of in the sustainability space now, there's a lot of family funds and kind of networks that, people that have a ton of money that suddenly, well, it's like, well, we would do some philanthropy. Like, what does philanthropy mean today? 100 years ago, it was kind of like in building museums and libraries and creating national parks. Nowadays, that's all about sustainability and kind of doing that on a larger scale. I just came back from the Earth X conference over here, well, one town over, and that was, started by Mr. Crow and his endowment, and that is a high net worth individual who has family money, and he decided to invest in this. And I mean, it's kind of easy to take it for granted in the U.S., but really, like your alumni network from TCU or wherever, that is a huge network of individuals, and that's really one of the big strengths of the educational institutions that, I mean, sure, like you got the degree, you learn some valuable skills and then you get out there and work. But really, I would say that the biggest strength is in the alumni network and leveraging those resources. I mean, that's really kind of been the biggest benefit that I've had from my alumni networks. And that is a pool of wealth that I think goes underappreciated. And, I mean, I think the schools over here do a much better job. And I say over here, like in the US, because I feel in Europe, you've got all these like really high class institutions, but there's no real brand loyalty. There is no real alumni networks. It just seems like such a waste of potential. So really kind of, take advantage of that, guys, and like build that network and maintain it, like even after you graduate. I'm sure there's, companies that come that, have hired TCU students in the past and, they themselves are graduates. Like you have an immediate link. I mean, might not be a brother, sister, or an uncle, but if I know anything, like I went to UT, right? And so you come say, oh yeah, and in oil and gas industry especially, like you don't want to be a UT guy walking into an A&M shop, It's just like, but that's an end. So do not underestimate that in terms of fundraising, especially if you have a startup idea or anything like that. There, if nothing else, it'll give you a open door and an eager ear to listen. So
Thank you. Now, behind you, gentlemen, we have a list of questions that if you turn around, if any of these are interesting to you, please take them on. And I can scroll up as well. We still have some coming in.
While we're doing that, can I ask the audience, does anybody know the definition of sustainability? Anyone?
They do, but
No,
They're
actually,
not-
I'd like to know because I've been in the business 3 years and I don't know.
so they're not necessarily raising their hand. Yeah.
Okay, I will take Chris's question
I
because that
wanna-
was directed to
I
me,
want to
but
take a stab at this one. It is the most politically weighted term, which means the meaning's lost based on who's up or who's winning or losing. It's just the big chess game of
It's the
Regula-
biggest crock I've ever heard. in
yeah,
my life.
regulatory
Yeah.
capture, essentially. Is the way I think of it.
I would look at it, it's a nice little buzzword for branding, but what does it really mean when somebody says our real estate, rental office is sustainable?
Right. It means it met some kind of tax benefit credit system.
Yeah, I just feel like I got my wallet stolen, right?
Yeah. 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 Oh, man, this is great.
the best things I've seen is like certain oil and gas projects where, you're whatever, there's like one where you generate hydrogen from depleted oil and gas reservoirs, produce it up, you separate the hydrogen, and then in the CO2, which occurs from the gasification, and then you re-inject the CO2. So you're effectively mining hydrogen, methane, and government tax credits.
Yeah, and go along with, the green shaming is my next favorite, right? I mean, there's so
Yeah.
many clowns out there, it's not even funny.
do you want to pick questions or should we?
No, y'all go for it. Y'all
Okay,
take this on.
um,
This has become too much fun. It's good.
I
like
I
it.
guess I'll go
Y'all-
ahead.
Y'all don't hold back either. It's just-
I'll go ahead and take Chris, Team 32, how do carbon credits in the energy industry relate to Bitcoin mining? And I thought I went a little light on that one, so it's a good question to answer. So
about 10 minutes, by the way.
So Bitcoin mining doesn't care where the energy comes from. All it cares is that it's the cheapest source of energy. That allows it to, and also because it's a computer that basically can turn on and off and not lose any work, it makes it a very easy tool to leverage inexpensive energy, especially if it's interruptible. And that's really what you get in the oil patch. You get wells that are leaking, you get wells that are old, and you get residue streams from very large gas processing plants that are basically giant streams of gas that mostly go to waste. And so Bitcoin mining, because it's so flexible as to where it gets its electricity from, can take that gas, throw it in a generator, produce electricity and mine right there. Now, because you have things like Starlink and 3G and 4G modems, you're able to go to very remote regions and actively take something that would either be vented or flared and turn it into electricity that can be then turned into a good / service, as in the Bitcoin, individual Bitcoin minted, but also the service of Bitcoin mining for the entire network. So I hope I answered that one.
Nice.
You guys want to take the next one?
There was a question up there about energy innovation. I believe, is that what it actually
Yeah.
says? I actually think we're technically in the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution, but I actually think we're going to have a 4.5 here, and that is the amount of energy innovation that's going on is amazing. In fact, I think it's going to be so great in the next 2 to 5 years that you're going to see the complete elimination of nature-based carbon credits. What do I mean by that? Is that the whole effort for the last 30 years to create this decarbonization effort is that the dog is going to catch the car. What do I mean? Is that the nature-based lovers have been running around there the whole time basically saying, hey, you got to do this to help the planet. Well, guess what? The most innovative sector in the world, in my opinion, is actually the energy sector. And they're going to actually create ways to take carbon out of the atmosphere. They're going to take it out of fuel streams. They're going to take it out of all kinds of things. And you're going to see that there'll be such an abundance of carbon credits generated from the brown side of the removal world that it basically overtakes the entire nature-based space. I know a little bit about this because one of the companies we're invested in and launching is going to do just that. So you're actually going to see some pretty neat things happen, and you're going to see some really sad people in the nature-based side because they've done a lot of their forecasts and a lot of things to basically say, we're going to sell these nature-based credits for $50 or $25 or whatever. And those, I will bet anybody in this room, whatever amount of money you want, that the average price of a nature-based carbon credit in 2 years from today will be less than $5. The removal side will be much higher than that, but you have to have it because you're going to have a natural arbitrage of supply and demand. It's amazing how that works. Supply and demand still works.
If you can, so we can trade carbon credits currently. Is there a betting market on this?
You could, the carbon market, for those of you that understand markets, it's not really a trading market. People call it carbon credit trading. It's like, I don't know.
It's like a credit.
It's like trading beers on a Friday night, but it's, you have equity markets, which are very dynamic because you're expecting the value to increase. You have bond markets, which you're expecting, you have, you know, you have the changes in the price of interest rates and everything. Well, what is a carbon credit for? You're buying it to retire it. That's not a trading market, ladies and gentlemen. That's a asset management market.
So there's no down bet opportunity.
So look at you had the futures market get created. So there is a benchmark on futures for carbon. Okay. Now, will there actually be additional futures created out of it? Now there'll be some basis different. I mean, there'll be those types of things involved, but really what you're going to see is forward selling. You're going to see exchanges like ours that create what we call a peak, which is just a forward sale of the credit. Now you actually have credits. Credits are those that have been generated because of good efforts by Andre or some of those that well has been plugged, whatever it is. You have a credit, that's a current credit, but then you also have what's called the forwards market, right? So we actually market. So projects that come to us, the project developer says, hey, I know I'm going to have these credits generated. So we sell them at a discount to the market, but you have to do that with real practical. You can't be, which all goes back down to who's the sponsor, who's all the activities in that type of thing. You're not going to buy it from Joe Blow. You're going to want to know that this guy can fulfill on finishing the project. You want to, you know, these types of things. And as you have progress along in a project, those credits are actually going to increase in value, right? Because you've de-risked the project. So any of you that are working in the oil and gas business or want to live in Houston or Dallas, you better understand the word de-risk.
Yeah. Speaking of de-risk, I think I would take that bet on the nature-based credits because I think you'll always have people that need that PR and some green cover on there.
Sure you do, but it's not going to be a carbon credit. It'll be a grant.
Perhaps.
Put $1,000 on it right now. Let's go.
I think there's a few more questions we can cover.
Due to time constraints.
Are we done?
Well, I'd like to, if it's okay, everyone give just a piece of advice for the future as these young folks are about to launch their career. I've only got 20 years on them, but I see a dynamically different market than what I remember. So just quick pieces of advice, and I want to allow folks to come in and meet you off if you'd like. We'll do a final attendance check too here in just a second.
First piece of advice, learn about Bitcoin, learn about sound money, learn about how your money is being debased. That's probably going to make more of an impact now than you realize in your life. And also, don't be afraid. Take chances.
For me, I think it would be, again, kind of the network, kind of leveraging and working with people that you genuinely enjoy, that'll make the projects more interesting, and then look for synergies between different ventures, whether you have hobbies, whether you have a job or a career, find the things that really you enjoy in that and kind of leverage those. And especially early on in your career, like, don't be afraid to be dabbling in a multitude of different things. And then the ones that you really enjoy, and then the people that you enjoy, and you kind of connect that with your network, you start seeing synergies and connections between these different elements. And that's really where you create your unique value, because nobody else will have that specific unique kind of collection of data points or connections that you have. That's unique to every single individual. And then you can see the ones that you enjoy the most, or that create the most value for you and the people around you, and then really just following those little paths down your career and expanding on those, the ones that work. And that's how you find those hidden opportunities that only you can see.
Don't be afraid to fail. Find good mentors. Work harder than the next guy in the room, and do the opposite of most of you in this generation. And that is, you need to find out that it's called work for a reason. And you need to understand that it is work. You're trading your time and dreams for money. So think about that for a second. Your education is important, but when you walk out of here in 4 years or whatever it is, you frankly don't know a thing. I hate to tell you that. Your mom and dad will be, happy that you graduated, but you really haven't even started to learn. The other thing is that if you don't think network is important, you're crazy. You should be networking and talking to people, reaching out and doing the opposite of digitalization. And that is trying to become more human, because the more this world becomes digital, people that are going to get paid the most and do the best and have a job after AI has destroyed the bottom 40% are those that can communicate. So learn to communicate. Writing is important. Speaking intelligently is important. Presenting is important. And network every minute of the day.
I would say pay attention to the environment, and not in an emotional way, but in an objective way. And the reason that I say that is it's not going away. The attention to the effect that we have on the environment in our business doings is never going to go away. To have a career in marketing, you'll need to understand that it can be managed and presented as part of your value to your customers, and it can be done objectively. You don't have to be all bleeding heart liberal about it, but it doesn't go away. So that, and with everything from your classes and moving forward, show up. 80% of it is showing up. The other 20% is talent and determination. But just show up, take on the challenge, and go ahead.
For our friends on Twitter Spaces, we'll resume at 2 o'clock. Everyone, let's please give a round of applause for our guests here today. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. It means a ton to have this industry insight, y'all. Our second attendance check here. Let me pull it up for you. Oh, there it is. Cool. Awesome. Y'all come on down and meet some folks. And Lee Bratcher just entered the room in the back corner there if you want to see an Army captain, the real deal. Y'all take care, and feel free to stick around for 2 o'clock if you'd like. Thanks for sticking with us here. I'm going to hand it back over to Jonathan in a moment, but I just want to preface quickly by saying that part of marketing is about syndicating and organizing capital for projects that meet the market moment. And sometimes it's because of regulatory shifts, or maybe it's a technological moment in time. Look, 20 years ago when I entered industry out of college, I was already in it, because in college I went full professional at the last 2 years. And for me, it was just a big tech buildup out of mostly Silicon Valley, which is on the south, San Jose, all the way up to the financial district in SF in San Francisco. And then New York kind of popped off too. And so going between the coasts, you could really capture a lot of value. But something's different now. It's not so regionally segmented like that. Technology has created a kind of distributed opportunity where you can join companies online. And we even have a few folks who are in the influencer category with several 100,000 followers, a few million in another class. And I've also seen, so enterprising in that ecosystem space and app space is interesting. But when it comes to energy, when it comes to, carbon credits and carbon capture and things like that, many of us may not realize that there's this whole blockchain space involved. We have entrepreneurs here and business owners here that can clarify this market moment and what I think is a big opportunity for many of you. And if you don't go into it, no matter what your major is, just knowing it's out there helps you trade, helps you have a better understanding and kind of decoding of equities markets, and then also how things in the mid-market are moving. Now, this is really critical. I talk about tuition return on investment so often. Today is one of those moments. So we'll have Q&A at the end where you can go on Discord and we'll pull up all of our questions. I'll ask that each team posit at least one to get that kind of attendance check to couple with your selfie that y'all registered. And in the meantime, try to capture as much language as you can. You'll hear a whole kind of, it's a new lexicon. The whole thing is different. And I mean, Jonathan in particular speaks in code as far as I'm concerned. He's energy and blockchain all day. And I call him sometimes, say, all right, explain to me again, what does this mean? What does this mean? And the reason is because if I become an LP in any kind of stage finance business or other, I need to have a kind of conviction. And I can't unless I understand what's going on. And so I want y'all, as you choose your careers, to also have this sight, this clarity. And that's part of what today's about. As to marketing, it's also to figure out where you might want to offer value in this space. And maybe you're doing venture coordination and being an origination specialist, helping fundraise and getting a percentage on capital sourced. Or maybe it's being part of the branding mechanisms that drive growth in these businesses. For those in supply chain, finance, accounting, or other BIS, and I'm sure I've missed entrepreneurship or something else in my listing throughout the semester. I love you too. I swear there are touch points for you as well. So we'll lower our laptops and put our phones aside for just the first half-hour block, and I promise we'll get back into them. With that, let's please welcome my buddy, Jonathan.
All right. Thank you guys for coming, and thank you for your hard work at TCU. I attended here back in '99. Shortly after leaving, I entered the oil and gas space, where as a land acquisition guy, I just did title work. Eventually, that led me to finding Bitcoin and becoming very involved in the space. And so that's what brings me here to you. Is I'd like to share with you about how energy and Bitcoin kind of intertwined. The reason for this kind of venue is that I attended a conference in Pittsburgh that showed me that there is a need for creating, at least up until I went to that conference, I hadn't thought of carbon capitalism as a concept. But at that conference, I really realized that there are ways of creating value by dealing with a carbon footprint. I wanted to share some of that with you guys. And so I collected some experts that I found at that conference and asked them to kindly join us. So I'd like to introduce them and have them come up. First, I'll have, let's see, Jim Rowe, with Auditorium. Rao, sorry, I'm trying to get it. Anyways, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks. I go by Jim. Are we going to basically repeat the same stuff from? Okay.
We'll have a new topic.
Perfect. Just as a sidebar for branding and marketing, I love that April 1st thing your president did with the group, the squirrel thing. Yes, and yes, I'm a 61-year-old TikToker. But I own, well, I founded Capturiant about 3 or 4 years ago, but Capturiant is actually one of the companies we have in a 32 company organization where I'm the founder and majority owner of. But most of my activity has historically been on the energy space. In the energy space, I've been the CEO of a public oil and gas company. I've developed power projects around the world. I've worked for 2 energy companies, power companies, one called El Paso, the other one called Enron. Anybody in here know who Enron is? Okay. I could tell some great stories. So those of you that want to hear them, you can catch me at happy hour without a recording device. But I was actually the VP of bids and structuring for Enron. In 2015, I started a company called Auditorium, my vision was to be the first online digital investment bank in the world. We did that. And under Toro, I'm a broker-dealer, RIA, transfer agent, commodity pool operator, valuation company, Texas insurance broker, all on that side of the equation. So we basically can package things. To Chico's point on being an LP, that means limited partner. That's an investor in a private placement. On the other side of our ledger of companies, we really focus on environmental finance. I created Capturient about 3 years ago. The word is a derivation that means giant capture. That's really where we were trying to get to in the carbon side. So for those of you that are really strong in branding, that's where I was going with that. I'm not sure if I've won or failed yet, but we'll find that out in a few years. But we also, so we operate that. That is the, in fact, I believe we are the largest, maybe only engineered solutions carbon credit exchange in the world. All of our operations are in Houston. I supplemented that business with one called Green Shield Offsets. You'll start seeing a lot of that for those of you that participate in personal carbon credit creation. If you don't know what that is, I'm happy to explain that. And then we also do sales, trading, and finance in and around carbon credit projects to, in fact, invest in some of those as well. So we've really created an integrated solution effectively in the carbon credit business of soup to nuts, and really basically looks like investment banking. My background, I was not fortunate enough to go to a great school like TCU, went to the University of Wyoming, thought I could be a skier. Came in 9 out of 8, so had to go be a ski patroller for a while and a bartender. Probably had more fun anyway, but happy to answer any questions. Don't ask me a question if you don't want to hear the answer to it.
Thank you, Jim. All right, next up, Mr. Purvis, if you could please join us. Purvis Energy Advisors is a local energy advisor shop, and we met at the conference, and so I'll let you do your self-honoring.
Hey, my name is Dwayne. I'm glad to see you guys here. I'm a petroleum engineer, 30 years in the industry, mostly as a consultant, helping companies to make strategic decisions with acquisitions and divestitures, but I'm also a serial entrepreneur with much less success than Jim, but glad to be here with you just the same.
Excellent, thank you. And next, we have Lee Bratcher with the Texas Blockchain Council.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hey, guys, my name is Lee Bratcher. I'm the founder and president of the Texas Blockchain Council. We are a trade association, so we do a lot of digital assets lobbying, advocacy work, business development. We connect companies with future employers, investors, or clients. A little bit of alpha for you today. About 30 minutes ago, here in Fort Worth, I'm not sure how far from where we are, maybe 2 miles from where we are now, Consensus, which is the maker of the MetaMask wallet. How many people know what MetaMask is? Whoa, that's really low. How many people know what Ethereum is? Okay, 50%. How many people know what Bitcoin is? Like 90%. Okay. Today in Fort Worth District Court, a company called Consensus that builds the MetaMask wallet, it's an Ethereum-based company, sued the Securities and Exchange Commission in the Federal District Court in North Texas, which is right here in Fort Worth, claiming that the SEC is violating their rights around securities law, that Ethereum being claimed as a commodity and then being pulled back into the securities camp, sort of unethical. And I think they have a pretty good case. But I wanted to give you guys that information. It happened just a few minutes ago, just a few miles from where we are.
Excellent, thank you. All right, and one more guest. I'm going to save you, Andre, because we don't have enough chairs. John, if you will join us. John Lytle is from Konica Minolta.
Thank you. John Lytle with Konica Minolta, and we have developed a technology that allows operators or users of a specialized camera to image and to measure gas leaks. So in the methane space, when we're talking about energy, it allows us to provide a tool for measuring carbon emission reduction, which can then translate in this magical world into carbon credits. And so from the marketing perspective, we are a tiny little group within a very large international company, and we are tasked with bringing a device into a very competitive market. And again, for the purposes of our Bitcoin discussion here, we have a tool that allows for verification and accountability for reduction in carbon.
All right. And because Chico is awesome, he brought a chair. And so you guys will get Andre. So Andre, please come up. Andre is with 06. They are a carbon registry out of Houston, Texas.
Well, thanks for dragging me up here, Jonathan. I'm a petroleum engineer that is not quite as good as Dwayne, and I am a blockchain person that is not quite as proficient as Lee. So we're kind of falling somewhere in the middle. I think what separates 06 is, I know this is a blockchain oriented or Bitcoin oriented session. But for me, honestly, I mean, I think as a cryptocurrencies go, that is an amazing application of the blockchain. But I think where we see the value going forward is kind of taking that technology and the trust and immutability and the ledger-based technology and the application in other elements of the different ecosystems. In our case, kind of adding the credibility back into carbon markets. But I really think that there's so much more potential other than just cryptocurrencies to blockchain. And that's something that we're really trying to expand with 06. So looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thanks. All right. So you guys might be asking yourself, what does Bitcoin have to do with any of this stuff? Why are you talking to us about all this? And really, it came about, like I said earlier, from that, just gonna pop up. There it goes. In Pennsylvania, recently there was a conference that spoke about carbon credits and basically just educating the industry. This is such a new space right now that the first actual carbon credits were approved this year. And so I actually do not know if have we had a successful sale yet of a carbon credit? Wellbore abatement, yeah. I don't think we have, right? No, so you guys are hearing about something that is bleeding edge in the world of energy. The energy industry is really kind of coming to grips with A, there's a market for carbon credits, and B, they have a footprint. And so in dealing with this footprint, there are conferences like the American Association of Petroleum Geologists put on that try to educate the industry by bringing technology companies like Konica Minolta, registries like 06 and Capturian together so that we can learn from each other and see how does this actually work. And so where I came into the picture was bringing the idea that a Bitcoin miner, it basically doesn't care where the energy comes from. It just cares that it's the cheapest power. And so when you have a problem where you have wells that are orphaned, abandoned, or leaking, a really good solution would be to utilize that methane instead of just venting it or wasting it or flaring it. And so my presentation was just that. It was a pitch to say, hey guys, look, before we consider plugging the well to create a carbon credit, maybe we should consider using that gas if it's available to mine Bitcoin by generating electricity. And so that was basically my pitch to the audience. And I found a lot of uptake from the Department of Energy. They had no idea that Bitcoin mining could potentially be used in stack. And so that brings us to today, bringing you guys to this room and discussing these ideas of how the technologies of Bitcoin mining, carbon credits that are very new and seeking market adoption fit with other technologies in the stack, like optical gas imaging, that have already gone through the marketing development phase and product market fit cycle. So first thing that I want to do is I want to ask you guys to explain to the audience, what is a carbon credit? Let's take that.
You did a pretty good job.
I thought you did a good job, but we'll try to summarize a little bit, kind of like having learned a little bit from the dialogue before. So carbon credits, ultimately the way they function is a lot of companies today have initiatives around emission reductions. There's only so many reductions in their emissions they can actually achieve through improved efficiencies and kind of optimization of their operations. Oftentimes their claims or commitments to reductions go well beyond what they're able to do. And so they're able to make up the difference by having other entities in the marketplace reduce emissions or prevent the emission of CO2 to equivalent to what they're doing, and they will pay them for it. So if we think of the atmosphere as one system, it really doesn't matter where it happens or doesn't happen. It all kind of ends up in the same way. And so this is where carbon credits come into place. It's really the mechanism by which companies can pay other entities to reduce or take out CO2 emissions from the atmosphere on their behalf, so to speak. And this funds the process.
Excellent. And earlier in the last session, we were talking about the difference between these types of credits. So Jim, could you tell us, how are these credits made? What is the difference between one type of credit and another?
Okay, there's two basic types of carbon credits. There's nature-based credits, so trees and other agricultural type of credits. And then there's what's called engineered solutions credits. So those would be things like what Andre does. He creates credits from capturing methane in an abandoned well and getting credits for that. It can be direct air capture. It can be sequestration in place. It can be carbon, it can be biochar, which I'll explain that all later. But so there's two basic types, engineered and nature-based. So you really kind of think of it as brown and green. Okay, green being nature-based. So you're going to grow some trees that are going to capture carbon. On the brown side, you're basically trying to reduce it before it gets into the environment. So if you're an oil and gas operator or others, you're going to try to create credits by reducing the emissions into the atmosphere. But you have to prove what's called additionality, meaning you have to prove that your actions are actually decreasing the amount of emissions that go into it. Now, to create a carbon credit, it's really, and also can be known as an offset. You need a methodology. So like Andre and his shop, they do wellbore abatement, meaning they plug and abandon previously producing oil and gas wells. In that, there is a scientific way to do that, an engineered solution, and you have to follow the rules, and those rules are called a methodology. So that's the basis of kind of the whole process. Now, when you're a company like Andre, goes out and he says to himself, I'm going to plug and abandon 100 wells, and you need to have what's the right methodology. So that's called validation. Then you need to have it proved by a third-party source. That's called a verifier. So that's an engineering firm or other technical shop that actually can measure that potential savings. Then you actually go to a shop like myself under Capturient, which then we do the authentication, the registry, and exchange of those credits, basically minting them using some form of, protocol. We use Adair Hashcraft ourselves as the blockchain they're really a DLT, not a blockchain. But the point is that you actually have a very, very scientific process now, and it's improved immensely over the last few years. And that's because there's been just immense fraud and misrepresentation in this business.
So if you're trying to create a credit, what we're hearing from you is that there's basically plant a tree and hope that tree is going to survive in 30 years. Good luck proving that. Or find a leak, do something about that leak, and then prove that it is in, at least for a certain amount of time or in perpetuity, no longer there.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to date myself, but there's an old phrase, a stitch in time saves 9, which would basically say it's better to take it out from the brown side before it gets into the atmosphere, before you have issues, than to wait and try to grow trees to compensate it. There's also a very difficult way, despite what everybody want to make on the nature-based side as far as measuring. Okay. And I mentioned in the last session is that you can pay, Chief Ooga Booga Booga to not cut down trees or plant trees or do whatever the hell, he's going to do. But you have a lot of moral hazard there. You have a lot of things. Whereas under Andre's process and other similar type of brown removal type of, you can measure that and you see immediate results. So there's an immediate success too, versus waiting 20 years with all of the risks that can happen, because there's a lot of things that can happen in 20 years to a forest, fires, people cutting it down, all kinds of things can happen.
Right, so, go ahead.
If you don't mind, let me rewind up to a
Sure.
higher level. Okay, so we need to have less carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And there are a couple of ways to deal with it. One is just not allow people to do it, regulations that disallow it. If you want to try to use some sort of economic system, some sort of market-based system, then the option for a regulator is cap and trade. And there are several markets for carbon offsets that are regulatory markets for cap and trade, California, in the EU notably. But what we're talking about here, all this the deep dive from these guys is all about something called the voluntary carbon market. These are companies who are willing out of their own benevolence to try to make the world a better place by, if not reducing their own emissions, paying someone else to reduce their emissions. So it's in that context that we're trying to deal with oil and gas wells that emit methane, which is very much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, but has the same effect. So we can treat them as a carbon equivalence. And then in that context, we have all these things going on.
I'd like to, kind of frame it back to the audience. This is a marketing class, so these gentlemen are looking to have you purchase their services, right? You as an operator or as an oil and gas company are seeking to get credits generated, or the other side of that would be you are a Fortune 500 company, you're a large corporate entity that needs to offset their carbon footprint. Talk to us about as a buyer, what does that look like? What do these guys have to do to prove to you that a carbon credit is something that you should be spending time dealing with?
There are a lot of companies around the world who've made commitments to be net zero. And the number has grown. Now, there's always going to be a gap between commitment and action, because that's the nature of everything we do. Right? It's a long time between my New Year's resolution and losing 20 pounds. Right? And several possibilities to lose the progress along the way. But all of the motivation seems to be for growth, not uniform, not monotonic, but the direction, the mega trend is towards companies voluntarily reducing their emissions. Now, the first and best way to do that is always insetting, to reduce the amount that you make in the first place. So you locate a data center in a cold climate rather than buy offsets for electricity to cool in a warm climate, for example. There will be a long transition. It'll take a long time to retrofit, re-engineer our systems. And in the meantime, we can accelerate the process with carbon by purchasing carbon offsets. So the question for the buyer then becomes, well, how much is it and what are the benefits of it, right? Nature-based solutions have issues with reliability. They also have much greater co-benefits. So sometimes a buyer will look at a mangrove forest growth and say, well, this benefits the island because it protects them from hurricanes. And I like that co-benefit. The advantage of what we do in oil and gas is that we can physically measure the molecules, the carbon credit sequestration in particular, where we put it in the ground and lock it up. But there are a series of criteria that people want to know about all of the carbon credits. Besides these ancillary issues, they want to know that it's additional, that it's reliable, that it's transparent. What's the rest of the list? Permanent, thank you. And what else? Is there one more? Oh, okay, there we go. We hit them all. So then people want to understand what they're buying, because it is all pretty abstract. They want to know that it's additional. It wouldn't happen if they weren't going to buy it. And they want to know that it'll stay there. And so in this spectrum of voluntary carbon credits, there are arrays of different features, like Dungeons and Dragons, right? The characters have these different skill levels, right? The intelligence or whatever. So the products are that way. They're different.
it's entirely different to rebuild a wetland in Louisiana or the Gulf Coast than it is to build a mangrove forest, than it is to plug an old leaky oil well.
So, in thinking about, taking advantage of what is there, and like you said, build out a data center in a cold climate because it's going to consume less and waste less. I kind of want to bat this over to Lee because Lee's done quite a bit of work with House Bill 591 on reducing waste through means other than carbon credits and such. So Lee, if you could tell us a little bit about what your work has been there, and then I'd like for you guys to kind of discuss how that specifically relates into, some of the emissions mitigation stuff, the discussion that we're going to be having with coming Quad OB and Quad OC regulations. And I'll go into what that is here in a minute.
Sure. So what we saw in Texas and in the oil field was that you have producers who have associated gas that is coming up. And so they typically will get a flare permit from the Texas Railroad Commission, and they'll burn that gas off so that they can get the oil, which is more profitable. You can truck it out, all that stuff. Typically, there's not a pipeline nearby, or if there is, it is at capacity. So you can't sell the gas into the pipeline. The problem is there was a sort of a perverse incentive because there was a severance tax anytime you sell natural gas, right? You have a severance tax to the state, 7%, 7.5%. So what we did is we created a bill that was eventually passed. It was passed about a year ago, House Bill 591, that clarified that if you're redirecting associated gas from a flare or from gas that was lawfully flared previously to an on-site consumptive use, such as a Bitcoin mining data center or really any data center that you can use there at the well site, there is no severance tax applied. So 7.5% is not a huge number, but what that really does is send a signal. It's kind of like marketing. You can use policy can be marketing too, right? It sends a signal to all these oil and gas producers across the state that maybe they looked at Bitcoin mining a while ago, it didn't fit their model. They now know that Bitcoin mining is a viable alternative for their stranded and wasted gas. That could be stranded from a flare perspective. It could also just be economically stranded. Maybe they're only getting $1 an MCF for their gas, and it's just not economical for them. So they can make between $3 and $8 an MCF mining Bitcoin with that gas. There's a big variance there. Depends on if you depreciate your capital costs or when you depreciate your capital costs in that equation. But it's far more than what they're making to the pipeline, right? And so there's lots of opportunities, and it's sort of a unique opportunity in time because many producers are not aware of this or they haven't taken it seriously. And we're actually starting to get calls from people in the oil field saying, hey, I didn't really take this seriously, but now that gas is $1.50 an MCF, I'm very interested.
Yeah. So look, market matters, right? You want to sell your wares for as much as you possibly can. And so when you're talking to an oil company about whether they want to do methane emissions reduction through a carbon credit or a Bitcoin mine, ultimately you have to bring it down to their level and what they care about. And so I'm curious, John, you do a lot of work working with oil companies that need to detect this stuff. Have you seen, from their uptake, are they thinking about credits more? Are they thinking about more on the side of taking that waste stream and either fixing the leak at the point? I mean, what is the perspective from your clients in this topic?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's the answers are multiple. In the United States, we have the Environmental Protection Agency, of course, which mandates certain criteria that companies have to abide by when it comes to putting pollution into the atmosphere. Air is a big one, a lot of regs around how much emission can be put and how you track that. So there's a regulatory aspect to it that has claws and teeth in the terms of fines and punishment and bad public image. Another aspect of it is the responsibility from sustainability. Oh, sorry to use that word, but the perspective of running an efficient operation, you want to keep as much of your product in control as you can. And emissions going to the atmosphere is out of control and loss of revenue. And then lastly is the voluntary basis. And this comes down to, is being driven by a couple of factors. One is public perception and goodwill. We now have carbon credits. And then there's a third, which is overseas markets. So in Asia and in Europe, there is a requirement that's been building momentum and exists in various forms for tracking the carbon footprint of production of natural gas. So we're producing a lot of natural gas right now, and we want to sell it across the world. We can do it to some countries with no baggage whatsoever, that is no accounting. But in certain markets that are very lucrative, the accounting is critical. And so measurement and tracking and being able to report just what the carbon footprint is for an MCF or a billion MCF, in this case for selling overseas, is critical to keeping those markets open, keeping your product viable. So all of these are drivers for being able to manage your emissions.
So I wonder if maybe you could speak to he mentioned accounting, and a lot of what you do with reservoir engineering and development is accounting of the value that is under the ground. Some of what 06 is doing is taking that accounting and turning it into a carbon credit, right? Have you looked at some of what the optical gas imaging is doing in order to account for carbon credits as part of that stack in looking at, let's say, an oil and gas company wants to mitigate their emissions. They maybe want to plug a well that's got, I don't know, a few 100,000 MCF left in the hole. They could get a credit for that, but they could also go to John and bring a camera out and establish that there's a leak there and say, okay, this is, as somebody that does more of the reservoir engineering side, which one to you makes more sense as far as like, if you are going to plug that well, which means you're killing the revenue generation going forward, where do you see more I guess common sense in applying the technology? Is it at the carbon credit side? Is it the detection side?
So I'm not certain I followed the question, Jonathan, but I'll tell you what I think you answer what I think you asked. Methane is a valuable, natural gas is a valuable commodity. And to the extent we plug leaks in producing wells where we have the opportunity to sell it, it translates directly to dollars. Now, we still have nevertheless suffered leaks that are commonly 3, 5, and 6%, on the high side, 8 and 10% of total production, on the low side, a fraction of a percent. But we suffer those commonly because the dollar amount is not large. So I did talk with a oil company a couple of years ago, who was the subject of an expose by a journalist, investigative journalist. And they were the worst fugitive emitter in the state. But the company made a deal with the journalist that they wanted a little bit of time to try to fix it. And within a year, they dropped their emissions to the lowest in the state, and they made a positive rate of return on it. Now, wasn't a whole lot of money, but the proportional return was significant. So when you are wanting to buy a carbon credit, the market wants to know, and rightly so, is this additional? Will this only get done if I put the money up? Or is this person responsible to do it anyway? Or is it going to happen anyway? And so with methane emissions on producing wells, well, there's a good motivation, a good financial motivation, and indeed obligation to stop the leak. But it's a different matter once the well is no longer producing, and a very different matter once it no longer has a viable operator. So for context, we drill a new oil and gas well, and at the first day of production, it's the highest it's ever going to be in its entire life.
After that, there are exceptions where a well can come back, but mostly it's the highest production is day one. And then it drains a certain percentage per year. It's like an interest rate in reverse. And it doesn't stop producing. It doesn't stop actively producing when there's no more oil and gas. It stops producing when there's no more money, when it can no longer pay for its operating expenses. So at that point, there's still oil and gas present and still some pressure capable of expelling that oil and gas. Now, at that point, a well is shut in or idle, but if it sits there for very long, people start to call it abandoned. This is a non-technical term, but it means neglected. In the same way you'd say an abandoned building. It's not a technical term, but a descriptive term. The technical term is orphan. An orphan is a well that no longer has a viable operator. If carbon credits don't plug it, the state will. So in that case, it's unambiguous that it's it's additional because there's no other viable party other than taxpayers. So there's a range of situations, and on one end, I think it makes more sense to do it because for other reasons, and the other orphan wells, I think it's very straightforward that carbon markets are a good application.
Excellent. Something that I'd like to add to that, because I think one key element that we don't, so the 0.6 methodology, we don't necessarily deal with kind of the orphan and abandoned wells that Dwayne is talking about. I think our fundamental thesis is that we need oil and gas because we like our electricity. I've noticed it's not, 90 degrees in this room, so we like our air conditioning. It's also not freaking dark, so we like our lights. However, in the production of the oil well, as the rate declines, there is historically that kind of break-even point that Dwayne was talking about, where it doesn't stop producing when you run out of oil. You stop producing when it stops making you money. However, our supposition is that there is a trade-off, and there's been historically an externalized cost that has not been factored into that, and that is kind of the cost of the environment, whether that's through like environmental degradation or the emissions that result from that barrel of oil or that cubic foot of gas that is produced from that. And by factoring in kind of the value of carbon credits, which, the price of a carbon credit is really kind of the value that as a society, or a market, we've given to the cost of that emission. And so you can factor into that into your production. And what we really provide is these operators a alternative way to monetize those remaining reserves. And the way you do that break even really is like, okay, is the volumes that you produce that inevitably end up in emissions, are those emissions worth more in terms of carbon credits and being prevented? Or is the value of that energy that you would get from producing those barrels worth more to the market than those? And that there's a flip at some point before you get to the economic limit where it makes sense that efficiency of those additional barrels, when you factor in the cost of the environment, it no longer makes sense to produce them. So this is kind of an alternative way to factor that in and monetize it for the operator, so that you can still be a prudent operator. You can still meet your fiduciary obligation to your investors and your shareholders. And on top of that, one additional benefit to that, which it's great if you have a portfolio of wells, it costs money to clean up these operations. And so often when Dwayne was talking about these orphan abandoned wells, that is not plan A for most operators. Often it is that you just don't have the cash flow. Nobody wants to invest capital when there's no return on it. This is just simply an obligation, and it's way easier just to declare bankruptcy and disappear and like leave it up to the state. But with this, you get a capital influx for cleaning up the operation. And so it's a way to kind of this monetization event at the end of a well life that kind of enables that liquidity to the operators to do the right thing and then be rewarded for it in exchange. So under, ideal circumstances, you get enough money back to do the cleanup, and there's transparency in that, and you get rewarded for the better job that you do.
So I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit, and I want you to try to explain how you guys are using blockchain to basically do what you do at 0.6. And then also, if we can hear from Jim on how your guys are using DLT a little bit differently, I'd love for you to kind of give that a step.
Sure. So really I think what kind of separates, there's in the carbon market space, it has been the blockchain has been utilized in the past for accounting purposes to kind of prevent double counting. So you have methodologies, you have registries that Jim talks about, kind of issue credits. And then those credits are digitized, as in they're for each credit that's being done, it's then one token is created that represents, let's say, 1 ton of CO2 prevented from being emitted or taken out of the atmosphere. I think what our addition to that is, and it seems the way the industry is moving, is the entire execution of the project is it's a series of smart contracts. So every step of that process generation, whether it's submitting the documentation that quantifies how much tons of CO2 are being abated, whether it's kind of the permitting process of the execution, where it's a verification of the actual execution itself, and all the supporting documentation of that is the submission of that is a part of the smart contract. The independent verification through a technical agency like Dwayne has, that is qualified to perform those evaluations. They have their own kind of MetaMask digital signature, which they then append to the project itself, and that's kind of immutably tracked that it has been verified. They have given their signature to every document submitted, and that's all in that series of smart contracts. Once that is done, there's a few additional steps, where you submit your government permits that structure's already in place for cleaning up operations, remediating the land. And so the way we've implemented this, we track that by the smart contracts. All those documents get uploaded to a decentralized database, in our case, the interplanetary file system. And those versions of the documents are also hashed and on the ledger. And so you know that that's the exact document that got approved. And so it's only once all of these smart contracts have met their criteria that the tokens are issued, once all the digital signatures are there. And so it's not simply yes, there's a credit, let's tokenize and digitize it. There's a whole series of steps that have to be met before even physically the tokens can be issued, which kind of adds credibility to the whole process. And anybody can review that ledger as they would with the blockchain transactions for Bitcoin or what have you.
So Jim, how does that contrast to how you guys are using DLT?
Not one damn bit.
So say,
Because he just did a very good job of explaining it. So don't know how to rebound. What we do is obviously what Andre was saying is we basically do the whole process, but we add to it the financial side, the valuation, the sales, a lot of other activities. He was talking about the technical aspects of actually tracking it and creating that and minting the credit. We use on our exchange at Capturian, we use a Dara Hashgraph, which is Lee's probably could give a better definition, but it's one form of it's a DLT, so distributed ledger technology, not blockchain, which blockchain is a subset of DLT. That I just totally gave you my entire technical knowledge there. One of the reasons what I think we also talked about, and one thing I'd like to bring up is why do we do some of this? Well, the market is also requiring it from the banking and finance side. Okay. And I think we overlook that when it comes to carbon credits. Most banks now won't even look at an oil and gas company for funding or financing. There's a few that still do it, but the European banks, no, oil and gas, you're pretty much persona non grata, right? It doesn't matter how much money you're going to earn. And it's just doesn't matter. They just will not do a hydrocarbon transaction. We can go into the funding side if we want to, but I just wanted to bring up that a lot of this is really about being a good steward of the environment and nature. And some of these things are being required. And the history of that really came from an institution I used to work for, which was the World Bank 35 years ago, where you do, environmental assessments. That's where it kind of got its origin from. And then it's just obviously expanded because the World Bank would not provide a loan or a grant until certain things were done, unless that project met certain environmental steps and criteria.
so essentially you guys are using DLT or blockchain as the amber where you put in that series of steps or proofs that you've done enough to mitigate the emission.
Correct. I would look at it as almost like your portfolio, right? At the end of the day, if you're a company and you've bought offsets, you want to know that they were retired and how that tracking and that process. And that's the whole concept of, blockchain and DLT is the immutable database to be able to audit that without much difficulty. So that's really the benefit to it. And in fact, I think the carbon credit world is actually one of the best use cases for blockchain and DLT. We'll just call it blockchain for this discussion.
No, it is, it provides a really useful accountability and integrity. I was talking to a guy last week who thought it was, that plugging wells for carbon credits was a bit of a joke. So his idea was he was gonna plug wells and then he was gonna print up a certificate in PowerPoint and put a picture of a orphan well in the background. And he was gonna sell those.
That would be an NFT, but you know. Anyway, we could go down that.
Well, we were running out of time, and so I'd like to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. I know that we were doing a
Yep.
Discord question.
Yes,
round.
we'll be in our Discord server, y'all. Let's get at least one question per team, so we can pull the lever on our participation there. And it's okay if you don't have an energy specific question. It could be career directed. It can be about where capital is going. We have a lot of supply chain folks in here too that might have some questions. I mean, Jim, you own 32 companies now, is that
Correct. Actually, on the supply chain side, there's been that's huge because actually on my board of advisors is a gentleman that was the head of supply chain for Intel. And now he just went over and he runs a big chunk of the CHIPS program, if anybody knows what that is. But his whole thing was on where the origin of all of these projects come from, be it whether or not it was child labor or whatever the issues, but a big chunk of it is what was going into the tracking of certain products. And if you think about a company like Intel, the thousands of different suppliers or subcontractors that end up being tracked, and you see the issue here, it ends up becoming a monumental thing. So those of you in the supply chain world, it's going to be a growing thing, particularly those of you that are focused on scope 3 and the scope 3 emission or scope 3 measurements. That's not going away, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens when we get to scope 4. Okay, so if you're not familiar, y'all, with scopes 1, 2, and 3, I would highly recommend you become fluent in that and fluent in it's tomorrow.
Thank you. And you're also hiring for analysts.
Oh yeah, I mentioned that in the first case, but we've already filled up 2, so we're down to just 6 to 8 now.
All right, only 6 to 8 spots. That's good. All right. So, gentlemen, if you'd like, you can turn around here and any questions that pop up that are of interest.
I think for sake of time, I'll try and pick some out and then float them up to you guys. So the first one is, how do you find yourself getting into this industry? Was it because you saw an opening and took a chance? Who wants to take that?
What industry are we talking about?
Your industry.
Which one?
Whatever. So carbon credits or,
Because I couldn't make it in
this could go to
professional
Lee.
skiing. Okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I also wanted to do a quick selfie with all you guys. Do the TCU horn frog thing, whatever it is y'all do. There it is.
There he is.
All right. Just to make sure everybody's awake. I used to be a political science professor at a university on the Dallas side. It was not SMU. And my research area is blockchain and property rights. And so I saw a gap in the market to be a liaison between elected officials and policymakers with the rest of the digital asset industry, which, as you guys know, was and still is a little bit quite rough around the edges and doesn't play well with policymakers.
Excellent. Next one. What does the day-to-day operations look like as an administrator for carbon crediting? Take that one, okay?
Well, I think we're still kind of in the development phase, but a lot of it is really connecting with operators because being kind of the registry as well as the methodology developers, we kind of have the full stack, and we really have to interact both with the project creators, the project owners that actually develop and retire their wells. And so it's really the idea with having it digitized. Ultimately, we want to be able to kind of like let go of their hands and for operators to be able to upload all their documents independent of us and just kind of walk through that process. But right now, a lot of it is really kind of talking with operators, qualifying their projects. Does it make sense? Like, are you going to be most likely able to meet the requirements of the protocol? And then kind of helping them create the documentation, getting all their stuff aligned, for the submission into the platform itself. And then on the buyer side, I mean, it's a lot of kind of framing the narrative for specific companies because oftentimes they're looking for alignment with the projects that they're going to sponsor with their offsets. to really create a good narrative around their own business, whether it's transporters that are looking to switch to biofuels and offset any remaining emissions, whether it's data or tech companies that have data centers that are looking to offset emissions from them. So it really is kind of thinking about the whole value chain of the carbon process, both from creation all the way to end use and connecting with the right people at the right points in that chain.
Okay, next one. Given the challenges already facing the carbon capture and storage industry, what are the legal obstacles that might arise if a company tries to incorporate carbon credits into its carbon capture and storage projects?
Yeah, different animals. CCS is about carbon dioxide, and the carbon offsets we're talking about here are methane. So ask the question again, and I'll try to.
Yeah, I'll go to another one. Let's see. How does imported oil and gas affect carbon credits? And what do you all do for a living compared to what do you all do for a living compared to domestically sourced?
I don't think
Yeah,
So-
that's a tough one.
I think I have an answer on that.
You want to try that one?
Yes, I think Andre actually has an answer on this because I've asked. So if you're taking oil off the market by shutting in a producing well, then my instinctive reaction was, well, somebody else will just produce the barrel and it's no longer additional. You're not gained anything. But what Andre's outfit has worked out with macroeconomic theory and research is that it costs more to bring a new barrel to market than it does in an old, and therefore you're moving the cost supply curve, and therefore you are in fact reducing the amount of oil that's sold and burned.
Could I add?
Sure.
Could I add a couple things to that? So not to self-promote here, but if you want to know what sequestration in place looks like, my valuation company, Clear Rating, so go to clearrating.com, you can download a 25-page research report on what that looks like. And to Dwayne's point here, the sequestration basically saying you're being paid not to produce. And there is a fair amount of traction in that, surprisingly. And when I got into it, and I was thinking to my client, why do you think this is going to be popular? By the way, it's a Dallas-based group. He goes, well, there are 400 groups in the world that are adamant about leaving it in place or sequestration in place. So you get those people that want to glue themselves to petrol stations in London. You get the ones in Frankfurt. There's a rabid group out there that will pay for that, which is, I don't believe in judging people. If they want to buy something, I'm going to sell it to them.
I want to pick one that I want to go through and have all of you answer. What do you see as what is the biggest pushback that your company faces from the public eye?
I mean, for us, it's really being kind of a new entrant into a fairly established market. So kind of developing a credibility kind of outside the established infrastructure. So surprisingly, we were almost expecting a little bit of pushback because we work with oil and gas operators, which you can imagine in the sustainability and environmental movement in general would be a little bit of pushback. But surprisingly, once they kind of read the methodologies and understand what it is we're actually doing, that seems to go across. So the only pushback that seems to be left is the simple fact that the established monopolies of the existing registries don't want having to do with oil and gas. So it's really kind of normalizing, I think, people to the engineered solutions and really the value that they bring.
Yeah, it's the idea of paying money to an oil and gas company.
What's the question again? I kind of lost track on that one.
Question was, what do you see as the biggest pushback that your company faces from the public eye?
I wouldn't call it the public eye. I'd like to add to what Andre was saying, is that there's two entrenched groups out there that are particularly difficult to deal with. And Andre mentioned the existing environmental groups. I call them the climate cartel. Okay. So for 25 to 30 years, they built up basically a business that, you know, they wanted to be beating on the, you know, on their chest about we need to lower carbon. But then when you actually bring real solutions to the table, it's like, no, we've got to go do some, you know, they don't want any change. So they've actually become defenders of the status quo versus actually that. Then the other group that's the most difficult to deal with is what I'd call the general regulatory market. And we self-inflict massive damage to ourselves from the SEC, CFTC, the EU I mean, there, from a regulatory standpoint, there's usually just as much damage done by them as there is anything else.
John, how about you?
There's really just not a whole lot of pushback from the public per
How
se.
about challenge for
Yeah.
you?
It's more from industry, and it's just getting the name recognized, proving the technology, demonstrating repeatability, and qualifying the process to be able to be used as a recognized appropriate method for the industry, which is measuring carbon. Then the other challenge would be the price. So.
And probably the hardest answer for this one is yours.
Yeah, a good bit of public criticism about Bitcoin mining. So I'll put them in two categories. One is the off-grid Bitcoin mining that's utilizing stranded or formerly flared gas. You can't really find fault with that, right? You're getting a 63% carbon impact reduction, like a 99% methane reduction versus vented gas. So everybody loves that. When we passed that bill in the House, Democrats, Republicans, it was unanimous, right? The other side of Bitcoin mining, that's called on-grid Bitcoin mining. So these are data centers that are using electricity. The thing that I would hope that as a society we'd come to know about grids and the way we consume energy is it's really about where and when you consume it, not how much, right? If you're consuming it at times of day or in locations, or sometimes both, where there is more supply than demand, then we need a consumer of energy for that electron, right? If you're consuming it at peak hours and in dense urban areas, that's not good for grid stability, for overall energy consumption, because the energy is being produced, right? Those wind turbines in West Texas are turning, and if prices are negative $20 a megawatt hour, they're going to take that because they have a $30 per megawatt hour subsidy from the government, right? So they're still going to be sellers at negatively priced energy, right? So to summarize all that, the public should know, and maybe you guys can help me with this. It's not about how much energy you use, it's about where and at what time you're consuming energy.
Gentlemen, thank you. I think for our last question here, and maybe more of a rapid fire, what's a piece of advice that you have for our rising professionals about to go into industry? 20 years ago, when I got in the game, it was a whole different environment. So thinking about what you do, but also maybe some advice you'd like to impart on what I believe is the last holdout in America, just respectable, rising professionals focused on the right thing. So let's work down the line here.
Should I kick it off? Yeah. Well, I think I said it during the last session as well, but I think really your network, that your personal connections. I mean, I think everybody is very much connected online now with, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, Instagram. But really kind of nothing beats kind of personal relationships, connection, like looking someone in the eye and then establishing that, whether it's a friendship, with people like that you meet in this room, whether when you start working with individuals, whether it's, just people in your circle, the alumni network, and really kind of just that kind of like leads, and it's easier to trust people that you've had some sort of physical connection or interaction with, where they know that, oh, you're a real person. I like that person's body language, and you can tell a lot by that I think goes underestimated. And then also keeping yourself open to all sorts of opportunities and really leveraging stuff that you have an interest in and potentially a passion for, and not necessarily limiting yourself to kind of just like, well, I have this degree. I mean, I graduated as a petroleum engineer, and now I'm on all sorts of, variety of industries that kind of peripherally related, but never thought I'd be doing, a kind of a tech startup as a petroleum engineer. So.
And it's a great point that things are changing. The world's going to continue changing. But I'll tell you that even in those changes, you're going to be in the business world. You'll be in relationship with people in your network for decades. And how you treat people and how you perform will follow you. People won't feed back to you to tell you that they thought you sucked. They won't feed back to tell you they thought you were kind of dishonest, but they will avoid you. So you got to guard what you do the whole time because it's a long game.
As I mentioned in the previous session, it was work harder than the next guy, put in the extra effort, find a great mentor. And I can't stress this enough, network, network, and network. If you don't understand what's going on in the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution, you don't understand what's going on with AI and the elimination of basically the bottom 40% of the workforce. And I can tell you that's real because I've actually been able to optimize my operations and I've reduced headcount by almost 50%. So, but who do I go for? I need people that have commercial skills and have non-digital skills. That means network, interpersonal, sales skills, marketing skills. That's what's actually going to separate you going forward. So never stop networking. And by the way, when you graduate and you finish, that's just the start. That's not the end. And I guess maybe just to break it up from last time, tequila or Jägermeister after midnight is just probably not a good idea.
It's real wisdom right there.
Trust me.
So after that, I'm not left with a lot. I was going to lead with that. But I would say just generally persistence. Things are not going to come easy. So just be persistent. Don't give up. I will harp on the network thing. I've now spent about 15 or 20 years in the environmental consulting and measurement and testing business. And I can say that managing your career with integrity, maintaining your network goes a long way, a couple of decades, which is hard to see from where you are now. Other than that, yeah, don't stay up past midnight and brush your teeth.
No. Staying past midnight's okay. It's what you do after midnight.
Completely agree. I'll draw some attention to what Dr. Chakatsky said earlier, which is he started his career in his during college, right? He started working junior year, perhaps in industry, Brandon. So there's nothing that says that you can't be doing that right now, right? So as AI becomes a major disruptive force in the workforce, entrepreneurship is a huge skill, right? Emotional intelligence and sales and marketing ability, huge skills. So learn entrepreneurship, be networked, and there's no reason why you can't start today.
Everybody, after the next session, right about 5 o'clock, we'll be at Lot 12, the rooftop bar, and at the TCU Hotel. Not drinking.
No Jaeger.
Yeah. And I also just want to thank you for going this far with us. And I encourage you to come down and meet the folks in the front. Let's all give everyone a round of applause here. We have an energy and Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin blockchain kind of crossover discussion. And you might think that's a bit odd. This is a marketing class. Well, part of the reason that we're doing this is because it's a huge economy of scale and opportunity for you to capture value. And whenever there is billions of dollars of capital flows, I want you to know about it and be part of it if it's appropriate for your career. And if you might think, well, this energy stuff doesn't really affect me, it actually does. I mean, we're sitting in a room right now that's consuming energy. Everything on your laptop is doing the same. And there's a kind of regulatory capture that's difficult to decode. It has different language around it, and I need us all to know it. So what we'll do as a courtesy all for our guests, our executive guests, is I'll ask us to close our laptops and put our mobiles away for just the first half-hour block, and then we'll get into Discord in the server to ask questions shortly after. Thank you in advance for doing that, and welcome folks that just got here. So I'm going to turn it over to my buddy Jonathan, who's going to introduce himself and then introduce our guests. And for those on Twitter Spaces, which is our live stream here, thanks for sticking with us. Everyone, let's please welcome Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to use this, gets a little better. So my name is Jonathan Cohn. I graduated TCU in 2004. and have been in the energy space actually since before TCU, since '99. The reason we're here today is because I attended a conference. Well, first, I run the Fort Worth Bitcoin meetup, and I also work in oil and gas. And so as part of my everyday job, I went to a conference in Pittsburgh, and I met a fine gentleman that I'm going to introduce you today. And we had a conversation about orphan wells and abandoned wells and marginal wells and how that related to carbon credits. And I went to that conference to speak about how Bitcoin mining could apply. And seeing what the presentations were there, I kind of came away with this realization that we're entering an era of a carbon capitalism, right? Where what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve the problems around carbon footprint and climate change, not only through asking the government to do something about it, but also finding ways of making money and solving the problem through profitable means. And so carbon credits is certainly one of the ways that we can do that. Bitcoin mining is another way that we can do that. And so I thought I would introduce you guys to those topics and how they relate. We're also going to have somebody here from Konica Minolta, who's an optical gas imaging camera company. And you'll see how that relates as well, because these are all three energy technologies that have sought, assistance from people like you in marketing positions that need their products sold, right? So they've all gone through an adoption curve and a product market fit curve, and each one of these gentlemen will come out and tell you a little bit about that story. So I will introduce them. Get out of this thing. And first is Jim Rao with Capturient. Jim and I actually go a while back. He is out of Houston and he runs a carbon registry, actually a lot of businesses. So he is a great person to know, and he might have a job for you.
Yeah, I started off with 8 to 10. The first session, I think I may have found 2 students already. So as I mentioned, already down to 6, but if you're all interested, that's a true statement. I'm hiring. You can find our information, I believe, online or Indeed or on LinkedIn. So on a serious note, looking for smart, bright, commercially focused young men and women. As I was introduced, I operate, this is starting to sound kind of boring, and this is third time, guys, so we may start off with the Jägermeister and tequila line from last one, but we'll start with, my background first. I have founded 32 companies, all under the eToro and Capturient brands. On one side of the equation, I have a broker-dealer, RIA, transfer agent, commodity pool operator, valuation company, a Texas insurance brokerage firm. On the other side, I have an environmental finance activity. The cornerstone of that is Capturient. It is the first engineered solutions carbon credit exchange, really environmental assets. So everything from water rights down to sustainability to you name it. And I actually started that with the vision because the carbon credit world is so messed up, trying to say, well, let's rebuild the plumbing and make it a better way to do it. In fact, I also have a digital assets registered exchange license from the Bahamian government, which was an interesting story because I actually got it because FTX somehow went away and I was able to get that license. Anybody know who FTX is? Okay, a couple people. Good. It's all good. On the other side of Capturient, we have an asset management company called Green Shield Offsets. We're hoping to be the largest asset manager of carbon credits in the world. What does that mean? So much like a financial asset manager, we're looking to create pools and financial instruments in and around the concept of environmental assets. So our business model, for those of you that are historians, is basically based on the merchant energy model between 1992 and 1996, where a great number of things were created in the energy space that reduce risk. And that's what all of this is about, is risk management. But happy to answer questions, just some trivial things. I did one of the first STOs in the United States, did lottery.com's offer back in 2017. That was very interesting to me. That got me 18 months worth of FINRA exams and 24 inquiries. So that was a lot of fun. Did the first NFT as a security in the world. And I did the first crypto exchange in El Salvador. And sometimes, guys, don't hold on to something, sell it before you think it couldn't get any better. And fortunately I did, because 3 weeks later, the market crashed. So timing's everything in life. I went to the University of Wyoming, have a finance degree, went to Arizona State for my MBA, and I also have a degree from Thunderbird as well. I'm going to turn it over. Oh, energy. You know what I was going to say about energy? What everybody forgets about energy? It is the single reason why the United States is as strong as it has been, and historically is the best place, because we have the cheapest energy and the best energy. And we also have something that people overlook, and that is private mineral rights. It has separated this country from every other country in the world. And if you don't think that's not true, think about just things like medicine and other things that were created from the money that was made by private oil and gas operators contributing that money.
Thanks, Jim. All right, next up, Andre Shaddock with 06. Andre and I met at the PA conference, and he is a petroleum engineer, so I'll let him knock it off.
Thank you. So yes, as Jonathan said, I'm a petroleum engineer. I graduated in 2009 with my undergrad. Luckily, I preempted the whole downturn and debacle and applied for graduate school. And so I actually ended up going to Stanford for my master's degree, which kind of, it was an interesting combination being in Silicon Valley as a petroleum engineer. That's not exactly an alignment, but I feel like I definitely absorbed a little bit of that kind of entrepreneurial desire for perhaps that freedom, creativity, and thinking about things in a cross-disciplinary way, which I think ultimately, well, I started working as a reservoir engineer, which was really not all that fulfilling, but I think ultimately met the right kind of people that thought about things in a different way. And I think that's kind of how we ended up with 06, which crossing kind of standard petroleum engineering principles with blockchain, and kind of really kind of cross that bridge between, quote unquote, the oil and gas business and then the sustainability movement. That's a whole interesting discussion and a point of mediation, if you will, that really hasn't been done enough. And that's been one of the main challenges. But really, I'm still an engineer, and I kind of feel like, look, if you can ground your whatever your product or your narrative in first principles, and it makes sense, then you can stand up to anybody's argument, and then it's just a matter of finding the right words and the narrative that can resonate with them. And I think having the blockchain and kind of terms like that, I mean, there's always like some hot terminology in the market, and if you look at the VC and PE world, the stuff like right now it's AI, and you see every single company that's pitching a deck. It's like, oh yeah, we're AI augmented, or we AI this. Doesn't matter what it is. You could be selling brooms and buckets, but like, no, we're AI optimized. And blockchain is that for a little bit, but I really feel there's some really key elements or key industries where it can really create that additional value, where it almost doesn't matter. It's not just a pitch. It's really true value. And I'm really excited to kind of be working with these guys and see that kind of taking off and being retroactively, or not retroactively, but being implemented in industries that just have been around forever. And I think it could really take us into the 21st century, because there's a lot of optimization and a lot of low-hanging fruit to be had still. So yeah.
Thank you. All right. Last but not least, John Lytle with Konica Minolta. Where is my Konica? Come on up, John.
Sorry, I was looking at that lovely slide.
That is an AI generated background.
Oh, there you go. It's an AI generated technician with the camera there. I'm John Lytle with Konica Minolta. We have developed a technology that allows the user of this camera that you see in the picture to image natural gas, which is otherwise invisible to our eyes, and measure it. So we can not only see a plume, but we can tell whomever owns that plume or did own it before it went into the atmosphere how much they're losing. And so the marketing effort and aspect to this is that we apply this technology to oil and gas for operators, people that are producing this natural gas, in order to help them detect where their leaks are coming from, measure how much they're losing, and be able to document how much they're saving whenever they repair those leaks. That's a great market. We are expanding our market to other markets. We're expanding our outreach to other markets, which is why I'm talking with these fellows. We found an area where there is a need to quantify, to measure, and to be accurate with the numbers and to be able to verify those numbers. So in order to get a carbon credit, you have to demonstrate that there is a savings. So we'll talk about additionality a little bit later. These are all new words for me, but and how to measure that and why it's required to have a traceable path in order for these credits to have any value. And so we're trying to get into this market and put our tool out there so that it can be used outside of what we're used to.
Excellent. Thank you. So I want to get some feedback from you guys. First of all, show of hands, how many of you know what a carbon credit is? 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. How many of you know what a token is, or Bitcoin or Ethereum? All right, a few. Okay, so Bitcoin got a lot of hands up. Ethereum? Okay, a lot of hands up too. Great. So these two gentlemen work with DLTs, distributed ledger technologies. I work with more on the Bitcoin mining side. And so I want to give you guys an idea of how this all kind of ties in. Primarily when we're talking about carbon credits, there's two sides, right? There's the sides where you're trying to prove that there was a leak and there's no longer a leak, or you're trying to do like a nature-based credit where you planted a tree or you prevented somebody from cutting down a tree. And so what's interesting in that and what caught my attention is I went to this conference that was speaking about that. And I went to pitch the idea that, hey, you don't have to plug the well. You could stick a Bitcoin mine on that well that you were going to plug. And if that well was leaking enough gas to produce electricity, then at least that's generating some value there that would otherwise have been lost. And talking with the Department of Energy and folks at that conference, it was pretty clear to me that this is something that needed to have a little bit more attention. And so this is the first attempt to try to bring some of that to the public. We're broadcasting this as well as bringing it to students. And so we want to paint this picture for you guys so that you understand this is a market that's happening right now. There are jobs available in these markets, and they're markets that are directed at creating positive impact and positive cash flow out of dealing with our carbon footprint. So when I'm talking to these guys, I'm going to try and frame the questions in a way that kind of references marketing for you guys. So what challenges they've faced in product market adoption and product market fit, but also just from a standpoint of, you as a young professional growing up, how do you get into this industry? What's interesting to you? So I'll try to frame the questions around that. So I guess we'll start with, Andre, I'll give this one to you. Can you give us a definition of what a carbon registry and how that relates to a carbon credit?
Sure. So registries are really kind of the accounting ledger for carbon offsets. And carbon offsets effectively, so kind of like rewind a little bit back and like, what is the purpose of even carbon offsets and why do they exist? Is we have public companies or private companies establishing these emission reduction targets, either voluntarily, kind of because their shareholders are asking for it, because they get value, because they have requirements by financial institutions that require they meet certain metrics in order to qualify for loans, which has been a big thing over the last couple of years. But for whatever reason, they've established emission reduction goals. And ideally and initially, you want to reduce your operational emissions as much as you can through increased efficiencies, through more renewable energies, however you can. But eventually, you kind of get to a point where you can't really reduce your emissions anymore on the technical basis, or perhaps on a financial viability basis. So what you can do is you can pay somebody else who is reducing their emissions or so there's two types of carbon credits. There's removal, where you're actively taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and sequestering it, so storing it somewhere so it doesn't escape back out. And then there's abatement, where you prevent the emission that would have otherwise occurred, and you kind of get credits for that. And this often takes certain investments, certain projects that have a cost. And this is what Jonathan was talking about, where you're kind of monetizing or these revenue generation opportunities in the carbon economy is that you generate these credits and then companies pay you to use that offset or that reduction on their own behalf to claim that. And this is where the registries come in, is basically they keep track of how many tons have been created in a credible way. And Jim can talk a little bit more about that. He's done it twice before in a very good way. And then they basically keep track of this is a credible offset. And then it gets transferred to somebody who then uses it and retires it, is what it's called. And then they kind of mark it off in their ledger that this ton has already been used as an offset, and so it cannot be used again. And that is the purpose of kind of registries. And that can be done. And historically, I think it's been done probably in Excel, I would imagine, like everything else. And that is kind of where our companies come in, and realizing that, well, the ledger, the blockchain, does this in an immutable way, in a transparent way, in an automatic way. And so that's how we're implementing it. And it's a perfect fit for this registry mechanism.
Okay, so Jim, I'm Coca-Cola, and I obviously have a carbon footprint because I use a lot of chemicals and do a lot of facilities all over the world. How do I go about using, or how do I use a carbon credit to offset that footprint, and what does that mean for these guys, as far as, like, you know, what real world impact does that create, and how does it create that?
Coca-Cola is a different animal all in its right. But Chico, I have a clarifying question. Is this the group that's keeping me from going to happy hour?
Yeah, I
Okay.
should tell everybody that first of all, we actually have some extra Coca-Colas at the front if anyone wants a Coke. And the other is that after this session, we're all going to Lot 12, the rooftop bar at the TCU Hotel, if y'all want to come hang.
I just want to
Yeah,
clarify
it's
all of that.
them.
There are priorities. I remember when I was in college for 6 years, that you know, there were different priorities then. The Coca-Cola is an interesting entity in the sense that they have a lot of emissions from a number of from their plants, from their suppliers, but a lot from logistics and transportation. And that's where you see a huge amount of effort. So those Coca-Cola trucks delivering their product are creating a fair amount of emissions. So there's a number of ways to why that's going to impact the individuals in this room. And that is the rules and laws and regulations that are coming down about how you measure that, how you manage it, how do you negate it, how do you really measure it for all kinds of purposes. And the big one for me, being a finance guy, not necessarily a marketing person, is that if you have a situation where you're and I'll use more of a securities phrase, but a bad actor, it's going to actually cost you money and your company money if you're trying to raise money. You may not even get funds because you have not had a emissions plan. So a company like Coca-Cola, being public, they're very in the limelight of reviews, et cetera, about what they're doing as far as managing their emissions, tracking it, and obviously offsetting it. So for a company like Coca-Cola, you'd have to break it down. Let's look at their physical plant. So, or the what do they call them? Distributors, where they're actually are the bottlers. There's emissions that come off that. That gets a little tricky from the manufacturing. But ones that are probably easier to tackle and measure are the trucks on the road, the diesel that's being burned, a lot of those. So if they go to electrified vehicles, maybe that can offset some of their exposure. But overall, carbon credits are really meant to almost be a change agent for how industry really works. I don't think it's going to be a 25-year process. I think it's going to be transitory.
Excellent. So if what we're trying to do here is incentivize, you know, companies to take the right behavior, I guess carbon credits are doing that by allowing some companies to create value and then others to take that value to offset the damage that they're doing. Is there, we touched on this in the first one. Can you talk a little bit about greenwashing and the difference between carbon credits and greenwashing and how they kind of interplay?
Got it. So this is the same marketing class. Okay. So one of the big issues that's been in the press a lot lately is the concept of greenwashing, which is really what a company or group or entity or organization would do, is basically doing a head fake, basically saying they're either committing to something or they've said they've done something to do for environmental purposes or regulatory purposes, when in fact they haven't. So it ends up becoming a branding, both a positive and a negative. So if they have not fulfilled on their commitments, it could be a very negative thing. So greenwashing is really, to me, a giant head fake. I can't remember the phrase Chico used earlier, but it was very articulate. And it's actually starting to become a real serious risk management issue for the C-suite being CFOs, CEOs, et cetera, in the sense that if you're a company, particularly a public company, Microsoft, Apple, you name it, that has stated that they're going to be proactive and commit to saying, we're going to reduce our footprint by 1 million tons of carbon, and they don't fulfill on it. Gary Gensler, who's the chairman of the SEC, is now actually starting to go after those companies because he claims that they have committed fraud. And if you're a broker dealer or anybody in the financial world, the word fraud, it puts the hair on your neck to stand up. It is not a word you want involved with you in your group. So what you're seeing is real issues that come along, because how the SEC looks at it is that maybe a shareholder, one of these four gentlemen with the computers up here, are buying Apple stock based on their good intentions to reduce environmental, and they didn't. Well, that means the actual C-suite or the actual CEO actually lied to the market, and in his mind created fraud, which then the SEC will go and sue the company. So there are real implications, and it's had a negative effect on the overall market as far as what people will state that they're going to do. Now, companies are much more non-committal.
So there's, a problem with some of these credits, especially the ones on the side of like planting trees and stuff, where these projects just haven't done what they said they were going to do. So one of the things that is a little different about the carbon credits that we're talking about is that they're measurement based, that they are, you have to have quantification. And so, John, I want you to try to explain to them, what tools we use and what is it that your tool does different than other tools that are out there that allow us to see and then quantify the gas.
Yeah, and that's the science of it. It's sort of a salesy pitch, but basically the physics of it are that you have a lens that's cooled down to a very low temperature. And by being at that temperature, this lens can pick up infrared frequencies that we can't see. And so the camera can image or take a picture or a video of natural gas that looks like smoke in the viewfinder on the screen. And so when somebody sees this coming out of their production equipment or pipeline or their gas meter, it's very compelling. It makes you want to act and do something. We took the next step and built in what we call quantification or measurement into the ability of the camera. And so we are able to, from this recorded video that you'll see up on the screen, place a box manually around that or a polygon and make that shape contain the plume, which is the gas coming out of whatever it's coming out of. And we can measure how fast that gas goes through the area where we're concerned with and the density of those pixels. And that gives us a rough approximation of how much gas is coming out. Now, why is that important? Well, one, it's important to be able to detect leaks because the US EPA has requirements for people that deal with natural gas, from pulling it out of the ground to putting it to your stove. There are requirements to not let it go into the atmosphere. And so we need a tool that can visualize where these leaks are so that they can be fixed. That's one driver of it. The market that we're exploring here is on the voluntary side. And this goes in a couple of ways. One is goodwill. And you talked about fraud. okay, you don't want your name to be associated with fraud, but you do want your name to be associated with activities that are actually measurably reducing emissions and carbon going into the atmosphere. So it's a fight against greenwashing, I guess you could say, because we're providing data to back up the actual accounting of, hey, we know we have leaks, we go and find them, then we fix them, and this is how much we've reduced our footprint. If you are a natural gas buyer in Asia or in Europe, where they produce far less natural gas than we do here in the US, and you want to buy gas from the US, you, because of your laws, are required to buy the gas based on accounting for how much methane is going into the atmosphere for every whatever billion cubic feet of natural gas that you purchase. In other words, you're a purchaser. You need a new microphone. You need an accounting of the carbon footprint for that gas by law. And so by having this data available, we can we make this tool available to the industry, to that market, over and above what's required by our regulatory. So that's our marketing tie-in.
So one thing that I want to clarify here is that we have, even within the world of carbon credits, even within the world of carbon credits that are emissions mitigation ones, we have two kind of standout ones. One where we measure the leak, and another one where we establish how much there would be as a potential leak, which is kind of what 06 does. So do you mind kind of explaining the difference there?
Sure. So that kind of goes, well, I guess it's still abatement, and fundamentally it's the same thing, because usually over here where you're leaking the methane, where is it coming from? It's coming in from underground. So effectively CO2 or greenhouse gases, which both methane and CO2 are really greenhouse gases, and they have certain greenhouse gas potential, heating potential. And that's kind of why, we kind of normalize on the CO2 equivalency. But ultimately, whether it's leaking, preventing leaks that John's technology kind of identifies and you ameliorate and prevent, then or the stuff that we do, which is, well, really keeping the hydrocarbons in the ground where they've been for millions of years, and unless we mess with it, they're going to stay there for millions more years, rather than being emitted either directly through the methane leaks or through combustion. But one thing about John's technology, which I think is really cool, that kind of fits into this whole digital infrastructure that we're building out, and that I think blockchain is a key part of. I don't know, is Internet of Things still a term, or was that very transitory? All right, cool.
I mean, it's in the world that you're going to put it in, it's more SCADA.
Well, SCADA is one thing, right? But like Internet of Things, that's just kind of like data. But I think like Internet of Things in ways that you can have data coming in multiple different ways, and how it factors into the blockchain and how we're using it. It's really a digitization of real world assets. So kind of like the digital twinning element. And so really what that technology does, it creates a digital twin of this leak that can then, through the blockchain, be uniquely identified and have its own little hash that can be part of the smart contracts and tracked. And once you've identified and digitized that leak, then the value comes from kind of the post evaluation once you've ameliorated or remediated that leak and it's no longer there. And then you kind of do a similar thing. And so now you have a digital track or on the ledger of, look, here was this leak now, and then boom, in the next time step, it's not there. And it's because it's identified with that hash, it's like it has that continuity, and you can
Real
apply
quick,
that.
Raise your hands if you know what hash means. Okay, hash is just a math function, and you can stick any amount of data in one end and you get another set of data on the other end, okay? If you have a decent hashing algorithm, something like what Bitcoin uses, SHA-256, then whatever input you put in, even if there's one character changes, even if one pixel changes, the output will be different. And so that's important in proving that something was real or that something happened, because it allows you then kind of to freeze it in space and time in amber, kind of in the block time where you recorded that. So when you're talking about a blockchain, what you're doing is you're sticking data in, it runs through a math algorithm, comes out as a number. What 06 is doing is they're leveraging that to say, here's this document, I'm putting it through that algorithm, it comes out as like almost like a stamp. Like it's stamped with a date, a time, and this unique number. And that means that only that document can generate that number. So if John goes out and creates a detection and then is able to feed that data into a hashing algorithm, that can then be taken to a court and say, look, this was never tampered with. This is the original data set. So that's really, really powerful. And so that's kind of what he's talking about. So I just wanted to break that down a little bit.
Very nice. Thank you.
I guess kind of moving on, one of the things that I want to kind of reframe the conversation on is, they're marketing students here, right? So how does this affect them? How do they get into these industries? I want to kind of shift a little bit to that. So Jim, maybe if you can talk a little bit about, your experience and how and in what we're doing as far as like we're entrepreneurs, we're developing technologies, and we're applying those technologies in new and creative ways. What can you say about what you've seen in the last few conversations that we've had that you can share with these students that might be valuable to them?
Well, something new that we haven't brought up before is actually it takes twice as long and it's 3 times as expensive. As the check writer, I know. So entrepreneurialism is tough. I've been doing it for 24 years, and I can tell you about 90% of the entrepreneurs probably shouldn't do it, but that's a whole other subject. But what you can expect for the individuals in this room is a little bit what we talked about at the very end. What's the advice? And that is, if you're in here and you think the world is going to be what it is today, cerebus paribus, it is not. You guys are in a rapidly changing world. And I'll give you an example. In October of last year, I put a mandate in my company to basically say, I want to reduce my operations headcount by 50%. I achieved that last week. We're doing 5 times the work with half the team. Okay, so you need to be thinking about what you plan on doing, what your first job out of school is going to be, what you think the growth is going to be. And it's going to be very different than what you anticipate. I can tell you, because even starting the company I did, Captariant, I've had 4 major pivots in strategy in a period of about 18, 19 months. So nothing stays static. So I guess my advice and instruction to most of them, I have a 23 and a 24-year-old kids, so probably it's a tad bit older than y'all, but point I'm saying is you got to be smart, you got to be flexible, you got to be doing things looking out, 3, 4, 5, 10 years out, kind of what is it that I'm going to do and what skill sets am I going to be able to achieve? And the more you all are, because you guys are digital natives. I'm not. I'm 61. I had to learn all this stuff. Okay. If I would have had a cell phone in high school, I'd probably be in prison right now. But the point I'm trying to get at is think a little bit. The world is going to change in the sense of AI, and the reason why I was able to reduce operating cost is that I can now automate compared to my competitors and some of the other registries. It takes them 18, 19, 20 months, some of these guys, to do things. I guarantee 30 days, and I can actually do most of it in 5 hours. That's competitive advantage. And if you're not if you're not 1 or 2 or 3 in your industry, you're going to be a dinosaur and die, and you're going to die pretty quickly. So be thinking about what you want to, how you're going to do it. Now, those we kind of talked about at the end of last time. Who's really going to be at a competitive advantage as far as jobs and careers and opportunities? It's those individuals that have a constant desire to learn. It's those that, network the hardest. Those that actually created. Here's the irony. Those of you with the best non-digital experience and abilities are the ones that are actually going to achieve really beyond belief. Because if you think about it, you've had in 1990 or in the year 2000, if you had a company that had 100 employees, okay, doing the same work as you would equivalent today, you need about 20 employees. And out of those 20 employees, you no longer need many operations people. What you need are sales and marketing, commercial people that can network on a human basis way. I can get 1 computer, 1 AI function to do the work of 10 or 20 people now. So you need to be thinking about what it is that really makes sense. Now, when it comes down to the marketing side and everything, I think the soft skills are great. Best training ground I ever had for soft skills being a bartender, frankly, right? I mean, it's really changes your way. So I don't know, maybe it's time for happy hour, but
John, how about you? How about your application of your soft skills in your
Yeah,
career?
it's a really good jumping off point for me from Jim's comments. I first want to say, good God, do not tell your parents you're going to go be a bartender because you need to work on your soft skills. Pay attention to your curriculum, and I mean as a professional. Pay attention to your curriculum and your professor, but I'm not an entrepreneur. I work for Konica Minolta. I find the structure works very well for me. So kind of taking Jim's advice, there are many people that are entrepreneurs that maybe should not be. I recognize that early. However, I also recognize that I have a persistence and ability to look for different angles. And by angles, I mean markets. So particularly for this case, the equipment and the technology have been used very singularly for the last 20 years since it came out. And we are in the process of expanding into areas where people haven't really explored before. And it's been a lot of fun. It takes persistence. You have to keep at it. There's a lot of letdowns, but you keep fighting through. So that's the marketing aspect of it. And the soft skills is partially resilience and keeping a good attitude and really listening to people when you're talking with them. So I've learned a hell of a lot just by listening to what these guys do. Still not sure of a lot of the words, but it's important just to be present and to focus on what you're doing. And so marketing wise, this is why I'm here.
Go right into Discord, or do you want to?
So I was going to let him answer and then we can jump into Discord.
And as a preface here, start thinking of questions you can ask. Each team representing at least one question on Discord, and we'll have one more response here from Andre, and then we'll dive into our server. Thank you.
Sure, man. I think these guys really reiterated the correct points, kind of where we are. I think from my personal experience, I would say definitely like learning some unique skill that you can then not market necessarily, like put on your resume and submit to companies, but kind of connect with your network and see what other people are doing and develop some skill set that is useful to them and offer that skill set, to kind of prove yourself up. So you start building your reputation as, like somebody who's definitely willing to help and not necessarily always be looking for, at least initially, for a monetary return. I mean, I think over the last 5 years, kind of like after I left my kind of 9-to-5 job, I started doing consulting, and I was barely breaking even, for like a year or two. But I was kind of just building a network and finding people that I liked, that I thought were working on cool stuff, developing a skill set that I was like, hey, you're working on this? Like, yeah, sure, I can build you that financial model. Like, let's just see how it turns out. You want to do this evaluation of this project? Sure. And then kind of developing some things and you'll find stuff that appeals to you. Or maybe where you have a natural talent and then you enjoy doing and then you don't mind doing it, applying it for people that you like. And then that kind of can be turned and leveraged into kind of entrepreneurial opportunities. I mean, I think nowadays it seems like every other person is an entrepreneur, and more often than not, it's like another word for unemployed, but it looks better on your resume. So really, rather than focusing on the title or what you call yourself, really kind of focusing on, what can I actually contribute to this organization or this partnership or this friend or whatever it is, and what value can we provide, and where you find that you are delivering the most value, then that's something that'll naturally grow into some sort of company, business, or venture, and that you're kind of predisposed to, rather than committing to one pathway. And as Jim was saying, it is a dynamic environment. Like, we don't know where the world will be in 5 years. I mean, now with AI, I think, prompt engineer, that could be definitely a new opportunity, like somebody who's the machine whisperer, learn that language, see like how you can tweak it and get the results that you want, what tools are out there. Then that is a massive leverage. And that's how you can become like a 10x person. Doesn't matter whether it's an engineer, entrepreneur, artist, writer, what have you. Like, you'll definitely be able to leverage that. So
Fantastic.
can I add one thing?
Sure.
Something that absolutely drives me crazy is the phrase serial entrepreneur. Does anybody know a serial entrepreneur? Are you a serial entrepreneur? Okay. And that serial entrepreneur, is he truly a successful person? typically is, but it's about 1% of somebody that titles himself serial entrepreneur. It's usually somebody bouncing between McDonald's and being the barista down the street, right? So it's kind of a cover up, and it drives me crazy that people actually use that phrase. The whole concept of entrepreneurialism is I think also been abused in the sense that I'm an entrepreneur because I didn't want to work for the man, right? That I didn't want to do that. But I also work between 80 and 100 hours a week and have for the last 25 years. But that's what an entrepreneur needs to basically be able to do. But that's okay. If you don't want to put in that time, you can be entrepreneurial and still be very successful and learn those soft skills.
That is an excellent point to ask you guys to feed us some questions.
Your Discord app.
Yes.
Unfortunately, this one, not on the browser, but the app itself is where
Okay.
this section will populate. It's already, should be open.
Are you?
I had minimized it earlier. There you go. It's Telegram.
There it is.
All right, so we'll click on it. Yeah, that should be us right there.
Okay.
All right, folks, let's all get our questions in, and you have some time too as we get going and as we ruminate over. Right.
So one thing I didn't touch on is how does Bitcoin mining even come into the topic here? The way that works is pretty simple. So Bitcoin mining doesn't care what electricity it consumes. The only thing it cares is that that electricity be cheap. And so anywhere where you have any kind of stranded, whether it be economic or whether it be physically stranded energy in any form, Bitcoin miners will tend to gravitate there. So unused hydro, we're starting to see some methane, like green methane, so like landfill gas applications. But for my, background and my application, it really is on the oil and gas side, on the economic side, because right now a lot of natural gas in the United States is economically stranded. What do I mean by that? It's $1.70 at the hub. That's the price point where like we see like go online and what's the price of natural gas? Well, that's Henry Hub is one of those hubs. So we look at Henry Hub and Henry Hub's $1.70, but that's not what the operator, the producer of that gas gets paid. I got to pay the pipeline company their piece, right? So by the time the pipeline company gets done deducting their fees from me, I'm maybe making $1 on that gas. And I probably can't pay, if that well isn't a big well, I probably can't even pay for the lease operating expenses. So I'm underwater. So what we're proposing is, hey, in any of these cases where you were going to consider plugging a well, or where you were going to consider trying to go for a carbon credit and you couldn't find the money or the capacity to do it, you could stick in a Bitcoin mine, or you could buy a generator and work with the Bitcoin miner to then monetize that gas by turning it into electricity and then selling the Bitcoin that you mine. What's interesting is that can help in the carbon credit generation process, in that it takes a long time to actually generate a carbon credit, and it takes a very little amount of time to drop in a Bitcoin mine. Also, if you take funds from the federal government for dealing with your plugging or your marginal well, then you really can't go after carbon credits. So it's a good complement to both routes of trying to deal with whatever liability you might have as an operator. So that's kind of how it ties in. My hope is that this begins to kind of tie in a little bit closer. There are certainly on the blockchain side some applications that could be leveraged there, particularly in the time stamping and the provenance side of things. But let's get started with some questions. Let's see, team number 3, can you clarify what the credit you are referring to is? Is it only quantified from emissions, or also are you working together on a project, or just connected from the conference? We're all just connected from the conference, but so I guess which one do you want to take this one?
Should we talk about how to to create a credit? Would that
Yeah,
be
I'd say
helpful?
that would explain it.
So it's not that difficult to actually go through the process. But so if you're a project developer, let's say it's Andre and he's creating a methane abatement project, and he's going to plug wells and get value for that. He's looking at something, he needs to have what the rules are. Those rules are called the methodology. So that's the first thing that needs to be done. And then through that process, that's really kind of what's known as the validation process. What methodology or what set of rules are you going to do? Once you have your project established, you will then go from validation to verification. Verification is a third party science or engineering type of firm that's actually going to do the measurements. They may go on site, what's called boots on the ground, and actually review the actual project. Then that actually goes to the registry. It could be Andre's or mine, and then you go through the authentication process. You go through the minting, you put it on the registry, and then it goes on the exchange, and you're selling the process. So it's almost like issuing a security, but it is not. It's not a security because carbon credits are actually either deemed an asset or a commodity. It can be created into a security, but that's beyond the scope of this discussion here today. But the process is actually not that bad. So you go validation, verification, authentication, registry, exchange, sale. And at the end of the day, after somebody has purchased that, they will want to know that it's been retired because that's what you're trying to prove. That's why the carbon credit market is really not a trading market, is an asset management market, meaning you're not actively trading something you know you're going to retire. It looks much more like the bond and or mortgage markets because you have duration, you have quality issues, et cetera. It's really a lot more about what the valuation is if you were looking at it from also almost like a rating agency's perspective. And that's what I think is very different about it.
What are the challenges being faced with the scalability of carbon credits?
So historically, I think one of the issues is kind of like the process that Jim just described. He said it can take a couple of months. Honestly, I mean, with the current system of registries as they exist, these are nonprofit organizations, which has historically been viewed as a perk. But one of the drawbacks of being a nonprofit is you have limited resources and makes it very difficult to scale with the demand in the market. Also, these are not digitized as kind of what we are trying to implement in the market, which means that entire process has to be done manually, which means you have to get a team of independent experts to verify it, go through the process, do the quantification, do the due diligence. Then it has to get passed back to the registry who does their review. Then they issue the credits. They let you know, okay, these credits are good. You have to go out. Maybe they find a buyer. And there's a lot of overhead in this entire process because it is done manually, which not only limits the size of projects where it makes economic sense to kind of submit it for verification and issuance through the registries, it also all just takes so long. And because, I mean, we talk to companies who already are, perhaps have their methodologies on with these registries, and there's a regulatory update to, you know, the way they're quantifying their emissions. And they go back to the registries like, hey, we would need to update the methodology that you guys are utilizing on our behalf. And they're like, okay, we'll get back to you in about 2 or 3 years. That is no way to scale a market. And if you look at any of kind of the expected forecasts of companies that have put out claims of emission reductions that are going to need carbon offsets over the next, 5 to 10 years, it's a market that's going to go exponentially. And this is a pretty firm belief out there, that's been done and evaluated. And honestly, right now, as it functions, it just can't scale because of how the infrastructure is designed. And so that's why it has to go digital.
I would actually add to that. In fact, that's one of the biggest drivers for me was when I started on looking at Capturant, we actually went and rebuilt the entire plumbing of the whole system. So we did that. So we used all the best process, new automation, AI. In fact, I got pissed off and I said, this AI stuff, I started my own, right? So I got upset at plugging a well, plugging abandonment, there was nobody really doing what I wanted to do. So I started my own. So the point is that if you see an opportunity, go after it. But what I would say in this whole business is that what I call the climate cartel, and what Andre was speaking to, most of you don't know what that is, but it's a lot of kind of these UN type of organizations. One in particular had a lot of problem, and that's a company called Verra, Many of you may have heard it, read it in the newspapers and everything. They had a lot of problems in 2023, which they were found to be fraudulent in a lot of activities. In fact, they claim to be a nonprofit. It's the most interesting nonprofit. I actually had one of my analysts do an entire deep dive into what they do as a 501c3. Anybody know what a 501c3 is? Good. That's a nonprofit organization under the US IRS code. And that basically means is you can operate this entity without paying taxes. You have certain rules. Vera violates 16 out of the 19 basic rules. Now, does that seem fair? I have to compete against that. Okay. They're really a profit-making organization. And they deliberately stop because they're actually were kind of created to help out the environmental market. But now they've actually become the hindrance to actually getting things done. Because the biggest problem in my view in the world is incumbency. And the incumbency of not being able to, they built this little fort. Now they built a walled garden, and they don't want people to compete against because they've got to get on the convention circuit, and this is a way of life for these people now. And I don't like that, and I'm going to destroy them for it.
All right. Next question. Konica Minolta offers a range of gas imaging solutions. Which specific solution challenges do you see having as the most significant impact in the developing countries like those in Africa, and why?
Yeah, I'll say that is a pretty good question. So developing countries, I think that fixed technology is going to be the next step. And what I mean by that is sensors in some fashion. Of course, we deal in optics, so visual, ideally, that are fixed to some sort of power source, whether it's solar or electric infrastructure, that can continuously monitor a site, whatever that is, a collection of wells, one well, a processing facility, a city gate, or a distribution facility. So that leaks can be monitored for in real time. In gas processing, where gas is fractionated, that is, the methane is pulled off and the other gases are split out as well, there is a lot of potential for really big leaks, blowouts, some of which cannot be handled by flares. So they put flares, which are big torches that burn the stuff before the gas goes into the atmosphere. But there's potential for very, very large leaks very, very suddenly because of the high pressures. And so continuous emissions monitoring is one of the best solutions all around. And if we can make them cheaply enough, they will be applicable in developing countries that are trying to get a handle on their emissions. It's interesting because coal is still being produced and consumed at record rates now, and we're starting now to learn about the amount of methane emissions from coal mines also. So this is where I think the biggest changer is.
That's a fantastic answer. I've had one question come up a couple of times, but I like the last phrasing of it. Where is the money coming from in this industry?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. If you're talking about who is a buyer of a carbon credit, it is most likely those that have high emission, they're large emitters that need to do something. And I believe, I'm forgetting if we talked about it in this, you either have a voluntary market or you have a compliance market. Compliance market is sometimes known as a cap and trade. California's got a cap and trade. Washington and most of Europe is a cap and trade, meaning they're regulatory. You are regulated and you must do it. Most of the US is under a voluntary system, meaning, and maybe Coca-Cola is not regulatory, but they want to be good and they want to have a nice picture of mangroves on their annual report to make them feel fuzzy and good, right? So that's the voluntary market. So they will actually buy those kind of credits. You see the money coming from impact investors and others, but for the most part, it's corporates trying to offset their activity. But what I would say is you actually have an interesting situation because there is a actual cost if you don't, and I can't remember if we talked about it in this section, and that is the financing issue. If you've not done something positive about being a lower emitter or trying to get to net zero or all this kind of stuff, then it's going to cost you when you go to borrow money or to go out and do equity or that's where it really becomes more punitive. And that's a silent economy more than anything else. It's most of the financial organizations in the world will not underwrite or loan oil and gas companies money.
So as a follow-up to that question is, what is the size then of that market?
Of the voluntary market or of the
Both.
Okay.
That's actually a good way to frame it.
I forget the actual size because every time you turn around, it changes. Maybe Andre would have a better thing, but maybe you hear numbers all the time that always seem a little, it's hard to determine because this isn't a regulated market. So it's whatever anyone wants to post. And in fact, we're working to be a contributor to Bloomberg to actually provide pricing. So I'm actually on the front lines of that transparency issue. So you can actually start to write options and start to create financial products where you could start doing risk management and hedging and everything else like that. So we're looking to create the rules around engineered solutions pricing.
So do you have a baseline and then like a almost like outlook for how big this market could be?
So on the voluntary side, I mean, I think the estimates for, I think 2022 was like $2.5 billion in transactions and something like 200 million tons of credits retired in that year. And, there's a massive, I mean, obviously if you forecast forward, there's two elements. So there's both the volume of credits exchanged and then the price of the credits exchanged. And so there's quite a bit of variability. But there's pretty good consensus, that if we're going to have any chance of kind of meeting these emission reduction targets put forth by the IPCC and others, it's going to be probably about $200 million by 2030 or thereabouts, like that order of magnitude.
Yeah, the last year or so is kind of a bad period to kind of do a snapshot in the sense that everybody know what a hype curve is? Anybody know what a hype curve is?
Oh, I gotta show
Come
this.
on, marketing people.
I gotta show this. How do you
What the
guys not
hell?
know what a hype curve is?
Okay, hype curve is that curve that people get frothy and it gets all excited and then it crashes and the market comes back down and then it comes back up and stabilizes. There it is right there. Okay. By the way, I've seen that market in my lifetime about 10 times. So memorize it because you'll see it 10 times in your lifetime. And that, if you look at the accelerating part, the uptick in that in the carbon credit market was basically 2019 to 2022. Things were going crazy. Prices were, had gone from 20 bucks to 85, et cetera. And then the Guardian article came out on January 18th of 2023, basically claiming Vera created fraud and the entire market effectively crashed. Okay. And so right now we're basically in that trough and just barely coming out of the trough. So you saw a lot of projects, nature-based projects that were pre-crash. This is why the dollar figure is different than the volume. Because the dollar figure went from about $85 a ton to some of this stuff, $5 a ton. And I was asked to sell some Brazilian credits. I couldn't sell them for 50 cents. Okay. So pricing does become important. And then you have the bifurcation between engineered solution and nature-based. So you need to be pretty careful about what you're doing.
Well, even within those, one of the most awesome things that I've heard in this space is, and this is really relevant for you guys because you have a carbon credit, right? That should be valued by the amount of carbon that is being mitigated. But in fact, what matters is the story. And the story matters more. Now, how can this be? Well, if you have a well leaking gas in the middle of BFE between Cactus and Mesquite, Texas, no one cares. No one bats an eye. But if you have a well in the Barnett Shale sitting next to a daycare center and it even so much as hisses, you're going to have a lot of lawsuits. And in the same way, people get that like immediate alert response, oh my gosh, the children. The same exact thing applies to the value of that carbon credit. If that leak was found next to the daycare, that's $100 or more for that leak versus the $5 you were talking about, or zero in the middle of nowhere.
In trading, that's a jump to fusion. So if you're on the wrong side of that trade, God help you.
No, that's the wild thing. I mean, I think the highest that I've seen is anywhere between, like you said, 0 And I think the highest that I saw in the voluntary carbon market was $70,000 per ton on like a very specific project.
So kind of put in perspective. So I think I'm the first marketer, maybe only our marketer for Occidental's 1.5 credits. Okay, so they're actually marketing these to Boeing, et cetera. I have some of this in my book, right? And they're selling these between $450 and $600. They haven't even had it. There's not a methodology yet. It's because they have credibility. But what I was really getting at is that the converse of that is I know 5 family offices that spent $20 to $50 million buying Brazilian rainforest, thinking they're going to sell the credits for $50, saving them. Now they're upside down because you can't even sell the credits because there's a no market. There's a no bid. Okay. So there's real market risk in all of this. So it is going to be a market. It's going to grow, but it's going to get ever increasingly what I call Wall Streetization. So not to be disparaging, the tree hugger crowd is going to go away, and it's going to get to the financial people, the marketing. It's going to get professionalized. It's also going to get automated and AI'd and everything else like this.
You're
Because
making me think of carbon accounting.
By the way, you'll start to see that because you're starting to see even my university started an AI master's AI program. ASU did. But the point is, you're going to see new degrees and new skill sets, and that's what I would encourage this team or this group to start looking at is what's going to be out there in 3 to 5 years, because just basic stuff's going away. You need to be thinking about what's out there.
Yep. And one more thing about kind of the securitization or standardization of these markets, because right now it's so hard to compare apples to apples. And like I like the analogy with the bond markets, and you have rating agencies that are out there, and then you can look at a bond that obviously has very different properties, but there's a standard rating scheme or grading scheme that you can adapt and compare it relative to other bonds and based on the risk. And that's kind of where we're getting to.
And actually, if you want to see it in the way, like did I mention my value? So if you want to go to clearrating.com is my company. We actually have a whole bunch of projects we value. So we're somewhere between a rating agency and Goldman Sachs's research desk. But if you want us to see it and pull some, we do it on nature-based projects, everything. And we actually do price forecasts, et cetera. So it's out there. You're going to start seeing that level of sophistication. You're going to start to see the securitization of it because we're actually creating pools, and I'm going to do insurance wraps. Then I'll be able to create that, and then I'll be able to create derivatives off that. Now I've created a security. It's going to get a lot more sophisticated.
That was Clear Rating.
Clearrating.com.
Appreciate it. Well, let's go ahead and do then our last question for pieces of advice. I talked about in the last 2 classes that the market's different as it was 20 years ago. But one thing, and you talked about some really good things to do for students just now as to upskilling and just being more realistic about what dogma is out there and how to filter that so that you get closer to capturing value, which means you're offering value to the market. Instead of just saying, here's some blanket advice for students in your career, how can they capture value as they launch their career? How can they offer value to firms early in their career?
Do you want me to go again or repeat my?
I always want you to go.
Well, not to be so repetitive as the last couple of times, but to me, it is work harder than the next guy. Find a mentor. Don't underestimate the value of that. Put in the time, learn different skill sets, even though they're not asked of you. And you must network. As I mentioned earlier, on the networking or on the digitization side, you need to network. Every day you should be thinking about it. When I was, let's see, 20 some years old, 1986 or 87, I literally sat one summer and reached out to 40 different people over a summer to learn what they do and to start my networking and to do that. You cannot underestimate it. It's not what you know, it truly is who you know, but really it's what you know about who you know. So it is very important to be a networker. And I guess the last session I said, nothing good happens after midnight with tequila and Jaeger. So do that before midnight.
I think one thing that I would say to that, it was kind of an interesting transition because like my first career was at Shell. And in the oil and gas space, Shell, they've got their subject matter experts. And so it's kind of intimidating coming in like as a new person who didn't really know that much. And you're just surrounded by these like world-class experts, and they really are like the top tier. And so they always know better than you. And so like, what am I even doing over here? This guy clearly knows way more about everything that I could potentially bring to the table. But once you kind of get out of that and you kind of get into the world of the small businesses, often it is like, well, if you don't do it, it's just not going to get done. So whatever you deliver and whatever you put out there, like, oh, that's the best product that was going to get done in that direction. And then, especially when you kind of get into these kind of newly evolving markets or where it's just at the forefront of stuff, whether it's carbon credits, whether it's blockchain, then it is a safer assumption to go with that nobody knows what the hell they're doing. So anything that you put out there is going to be like a good solution because there's nothing else really like it out there. So if you put in the time and you just go out and you take your best shot, and then understanding that like, yeah, the first iteration is going to be the best that's out there, but it might not achieve exactly what you want, but at least then you have a data point and you have something that you can refine on, that you can optimize on, and you have that information, and that nobody else has that information because they have not put something out there. So viewing it as like an iterative process, and kind of from the assumption that there is no wrong answer, like it's okay.
Yeah, I love listening to these guys. I don't have anything earth shattering or novel or new. It's really basic. Persistence, be patient with yourself and with, you know, how your future is shaping up. Networking, absolutely. Form your networks now. Reach out to people in areas where you're interested or maybe interested. Learn what they do and how they do it. And as far as bringing value, I think that being prepared is the best advice that I can put. And what do I mean by that? You don't have to know everything that an employer will expect. So you don't have to be great at it, but you have to be as prepared as you can be to find or to look for the things that you're going to be fulfilling, that are going to fulfill you. If you can be prepared when you go to talk to a prospective employer, it's going to go a long way. So preparation, I think, is huge.
Can I add a couple things? I've probably interviewed 5,000 kids. And I would say I've never once asked somebody what their GPA is because I couldn't give a shit. But I always ask things like, what's your birth order? Because a person's personality is really what their birth order is. If you really want to get to, I learned more from that than what, and their siblings of what they do and everything. That's really about what their personalities are. So don't underestimate birth order. Don't underestimate some of these other things. But if somebody asks you what your GPA is, you probably should find a different organization to work for.
For me, I'd like to invite you guys out to Fort Bitcoin. It's the monthly meetup. Try to host it every third Tuesday of the month. And yeah, look, don't be scared of trying new things. Don't be scared of really not trusting and really verifying what it is people are telling you. A lot of the carbon credit subject that you heard about today is just that. It's that we don't want to trust that a carbon credit can just be minted because a company says, oh, well, I'm doing something. You have to prove it. And similarly in life, you have to prove that the things that you're touching are real. So don't trust, verify, and learn a little bit about Bitcoin.
All right, folks, let's give a round of applause to our guests here. All right.